Hello everyone, and welcome back to Midnight Horror. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the video. Story 1. I turned onto the main road, glancing in my rearview mirror as I drove. A motorcycle trailed behind me, its headlight glaring in the darkness. At first I thought nothing of it, but after several miles it remained just a few car lengths behind. I switched lanes a few times expecting it to pass, but it never did. Unease crept into my chest as I turned onto a quieter road, hoping to shake them off. The motorcycle followed, mirroring every move I made. My fingers tightened on the steering wheel as I took another turn onto a back road, one I rarely used. The rider followed without hesitation, their headlight a constant presence in my mirror. I tried to convince myself it was just a coincidence, but my pulse quickened. I deliberately took a random right turn, then another, leading myself onto unfamiliar roads. The motorcycle remained behind me, never closing the distance but never backing off. My breathing became shallow as I realized this wasn't just someone headed in the same direction. The road ahead stretched empty, the streetlights sparse and dim. I pressed the gas, hoping to create some distance, but the motorcycle matched my speed. The rider's helmet reflected the glow of my taillights, a faceless figure shadowing my every move. My heart pounded as I spotted an upcoming intersection, debating whether to stop or keep moving. I turned abruptly down a narrow road, my tires skidding slightly on the pavement. The motorcycle followed, unwavering in its pursuit. I reached for my phone, fumbling to unlock it with shaky hands. No signal. My stomach twisted as I realized how isolated this road was. Determined not to panic, I slowed down slightly, hoping to see any signs of life: a house, a gas station, anything. Nothing but trees and the empty road stretched ahead. The motorcycle inched closer, its presence suffocating. I could feel the rider watching me, though I couldn't see their face. My mind raced as I considered my options. Stopping felt dangerous, but so did continuing into the unknown. I spotted a road up ahead and swerved onto it without signaling. My car jerked as I made the sharp turn, my tires kicking up loose gravel. The motorcycle followed instantly, its headlight unwavering. Adrenaline surged through me as I pushed the speed limit, the engine roaring in protest. The road twisted sharply, and I barely managed to stay in control. My grip tightened on the wheel, my palms slick with sweat. The rider kept up effortlessly, as if they had expected every move I made. A cold realization settled and I couldn't outrun them. I needed a plan, a way to lose them without risking a crash. Up ahead, I noticed a small dirt path leading into the trees. Without hesitation, I veered onto it, my car jolting violently as I sped down the unpaved road. Dust billowed behind me, reducing visibility. For a moment I thought I had made a mistake, but when I glanced back, the motorcycle was gone. My heart pounded in my ears as I kept driving, expecting to see that headlight reappear. The trees closed in around the narrow path, branches scraping against my windows. The silence felt deafening. I finally spotted a clearing up ahead, a small, abandoned structure sitting in the middle of it. I pulled over, cutting my engine and holding my breath. The only sound was the distant hum of insects in the night. My fingers trembled as I reached for my phone again, still no signal. Minutes passed, each one stretching endlessly. I debated whether to turn back, but a part of me feared I'd run straight into the rider. My mind conjured terrifying possibilities. What if they had stopped somewhere nearby, waiting? What if they knew these roads better than I did? A sudden rustling from the trees made my blood run cold. My hands tightened on the wheel, my body frozen in place. I strained my ears, trying to determine if it was just an animal or something else. The sound stopped, but the unease remained. Summoning my courage, I turned the key in the ignition, the engine sputtering to life. I slowly backed out, my eyes darting between my mirrors and the tree line. The road felt even darker now, my headlights barely cutting through the thick night air. As I merged back onto the main road, I kept my speed steady, unwilling to draw attention. My heart jumped into my throat when I saw something in my rearview mirror. A single headlight flickered in the distance, emerging from the path I had just left. It was them. They had waited. I fought the urge to floor the gas, knowing reckless speed could get me killed. Instead, I focused on reaching the highway, where other cars might be. My fingers dug into the steering wheel as the motorcycle inched closer, their presence like a shadow I couldn't shake. The distant glow of streetlights signaled the highway ahead. Relief surged through me as I merged onto it, joining the flow of cars. My eyes flicked to the mirror, still there, but hanging back now, almost watching. The rider stayed behind me for another mile before slowing down. Then, just like that, they turned off onto an exit without warning. I let out a shaky breath, my hands trembling as I kept driving. My mind struggled to process what had just happened. Who were they? What did they want? I drove straight home, locking every door the moment I stepped inside. Sleep never came that night, my mind replaying every second of that terrifying pursuit. I checked my mirrors obsessively for the next few days, half expecting to see that single headlight reappear. It never did, but the feeling of being watched never truly left. Story 2. Staying late at the university library had become a habit of mine, especially during exam season. The quiet, the dim lighting, and the scent of old books helped me focus better than anywhere else. That night was no different, except for the unsettling presence of a man sitting across from me. At first, I barely noticed him, too absorbed in my notes to pay attention to anyone else. But after flipping through several pages of my textbook, I glanced up and saw him still there. He hadn't moved an inch, his eyes fixed on me with an unnerving intensity. I looked away quickly, convincing myself I was imagining things. Maybe he was just zoning out, lost in his own thoughts, and I happened to be in his line of sight. But as the minutes passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that his gaze hadn't wavered. An hour went by, and I became increasingly aware of his presence. He hadn't touched a book, a laptop, or even a pen. He just sat there, his hands resting on the table, his expression blank but deliberate. I shifted in my seat, feeling the weight of his stare press down on me. I tried to ignore him, forcing myself to focus on my notes, but my concentration was slipping. The more I pretended he wasn't there, the more aware I became of his stillness. My pulse quickened as I debated whether to gather my things and leave. Another 30 minutes passed, and I finally decided I couldn't take it anymore. I slowly packed my books into my bag, making as little noise as possible. Just as I zipped it shut, I stole one last glance at him, hoping he'd look away and prove me wrong. He didn't. His eyes remained locked on mine, his face void of any emotion. A shiver ran down my spine as I stood up, trying to appear unfazed. My heart pounded as I turned away, making my way toward the exit as casually as I could. The library was nearly empty at that hour, the few remaining students scattered among the tables. I resisted the urge to look back, afraid of what I might see. Each step felt agonizingly slow, the air thick with a growing sense of dread. Reaching the exit, I exhaled in relief and pushed open the heavy doors. The cool night air hit my face, grounding me for a moment. But just as I stepped outside, I heard the faint creak of a chair behind me. I didn't dare turn around. My feet moved on their own, carrying me across the courtyard, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The campus was eerily quiet, the streetlights casting long shadows on the pavement. I listened intently, my ears straining for any sound of footsteps behind me. For a few seconds, there was nothing but silence. Then, the unmistakable sound of shoes clicking against the pavement sent a jolt of fear through my body. He was following me. My hands tightened around the straps of my bag as I quickened my pace. My dorm wasn't far, but at that moment, it felt miles away. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run, but I forced myself to stay composed. If I ran, he might chase me, and I didn't want to find out what would happen if he caught up. I took a sharp turn, hoping to lose him, and finally risked a glance over my shoulder. My stomach dropped when I saw him, still walking at the same steady pace, his gaze locked onto me. There was something deeply unsettling about the way he moved, calm, controlled, as if he had all the time in the world. I reached the entrance of my dorm building and fumbled for my keycard. My hands were shaking, making it difficult to swipe it through the reader. The beeping sound it made seemed impossibly loud in the stillness of the night. The door clicked open, and I darted inside, slamming it shut behind me. My chest heaved as I pressed my back against the cool glass, my eyes scanning the empty lobby. I forced myself to take deep breaths, trying to steady my racing heart. Peering outside, I expected to see him standing there, waiting. But the courtyard was empty, the shadows stretching eerily across the ground. Had he given up? The thought did little to ease the lingering fear coiling in my stomach. I hurried to my room, locking the door behind me before collapsing onto my bed. My mind raced with 1,000 possibilities. Who was he? What did he want? And why had he been watching me for so long? Sleep was impossible. Every creak of the building sent my nerves into overdrive. I kept checking the lock, pacing back and forth, feeling like a trapped animal. No matter how much I tried to convince myself it was over, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being watched. Morning couldn't come fast enough. As soon as the sun rose, I decided to report the incident to campus security. Maybe they had cameras in the library that could identify him. Maybe they had seen him before. The officer at the security desk listened carefully as I described everything. He nodded, his face neutral, but there was something in his eyes that made my stomach twist. When I finished, he asked me to wait while he checked the surveillance footage. I sat in the stiff plastic chair, my fingers tapping anxiously against my knee. Minutes dragged on before he returned, his expression unreadable. He hesitated before speaking, as if choosing his words carefully. "We checked the footage," he said finally, his voice even. "We saw you sitting in the library studying, but there was no one sitting across from you." A cold wave of fear washed over me. I shook my head, gripping the edges of the chair. "That's not possible," I whispered. "I saw him. He followed me." The officer exhaled, exchanging a glance with his colleague before looking back at me. "No one was there," he repeated, "and no one followed you outside." My skin prickled, my breath coming in uneven gasps. I wanted to argue, to demand they check again, but deep down I already knew what they would say. The man I had seen, the one who had watched me for hours, had never been there at all. Story 3. Jogging early in the morning had always been my routine. The crisp air, the quiet hum of the world waking up, and the steady rhythm of my feet against the dirt trail gave me a sense of peace. This particular morning felt no different until I rounded a bend and noticed something strange on the path ahead. A pair of shoes sat neatly beside the trail, and on top of them was a folded piece of paper. I slowed my pace, my breath steadying as I took in the sight. The shoes looked brand new, white with red stripes, the laces tucked in as if someone had carefully placed them there. Curiosity pushed me forward, and I crouched down, reaching for the note. As I unfolded it, a chill ran through me before I even read the words. 3 simple ones were scrawled in uneven handwriting. "You're next." A wave of unease rolled over me as I stood back up, glancing around. The trees on either side of the trail stretched high, their dense branches blocking out most of the morning sun. There was no one in sight, no footsteps ahead or behind me. I scanned the area, my skin prickling with the feeling of being watched, but the only sound was the distant chirping of birds. I forced a breath and tried to shake the feeling creeping up my spine. Maybe it was a prank, something left behind by a bored teenager trying to scare morning joggers. Still, the careful placement of the shoes and the deliberate message felt too intentional. My fingers tightened around the note as I debated what to do next. Turning back seemed like the safest option, but I had been running this trail for years without anything like this happening. I took a hesitant step forward, my eyes flicking to the trees again. The silence felt heavier now, pressing down like an unseen force. I swallowed hard and started jogging again, quicker this time, wanting to put distance between me and the unsettling sight. The rest of my run was a blur of paranoia and adrenaline. Every rustling leaf, every shift in the shadows, felt like something lurking just out of sight. I didn't stop until I reached the parking lot where my car was waiting. My hands were shaking as I fumbled with my keys, my breath coming faster than it should have from just the run. Sliding into the driver's seat, I locked the doors immediately. My mind raced with questions, trying to rationalize what I had found. Who would leave something like that? Was it meant for someone specific, or was I just unlucky enough to find it first? I considered calling the police, but what would I even say? A pair of shoes and a note weren't exactly solid evidence of anything. As I drove home, I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone following me. My street was quiet when I pulled into the driveway, the same as always. But as I stepped out of my car, that uneasy feeling hadn't faded. I locked my front door behind me and double-checked the windows, something I had never felt the need to do before. The rest of the day passed in a fog of unease. Every noise felt sharper, every movement outside my window made me jump. I kept thinking about the note, about the shoes, about how deliberately they had been placed. Sleep didn't come easy that night. I kept waking up to the feeling that someone was just outside my window, watching. Morning came, but the dread remained. I hesitated before lacing up my running shoes, my routine now tainted with a sense of fear. The thought of going back to the trail made my stomach twist, but avoiding it felt like letting the fear win. Taking a deep breath, I stepped outside, determined to shake this off. The drive to the trail was filled with second-guessing. My fingers tapped against the steering wheel as I debated turning around. When I pulled into the parking lot, my heart pounded harder than it should have. The lot was emptier than usual, only one other car parked near the entrance. I started my run slower than usual, my ears tuned in to every sound around me. The trees felt taller today, their shadows stretching further across the trail. My breath came steady, but the tension in my chest refused to fade. Each step felt heavier as I neared the spot where I had found the shoes yesterday. The spot was empty now, no trace of the shoes or the note. The dirt showed no sign that anything had been there at all. I exhaled sharply, my shoulders relaxing slightly. Maybe someone had taken them, or maybe it had just been a one-time thing. I picked up my pace, convincing myself it was nothing. But just as I started to feel a sliver of relief, I caught something out of the corner of my eye. A figure stood deep in the trees, barely visible through the thick foliage. My body went rigid, my pulse spiking as I focused on the dark silhouette. They weren't moving, just standing there, too still, too deliberate. I couldn't make out any features, but I knew without a doubt that they were staring at me. My feet moved before my mind could catch up, instinct taking over. I turned and ran, faster than I ever had before, the only thought in my mind being to get away. The path blurred under me as I pushed forward, my legs burning from the sudden sprint. I didn't dare look back. The trees closed in around me, their shadows stretching long across the trail. My breaths came ragged, my heartbeat thundering in my ears. The parking lot came into view and I didn't slow down until I reached my car. My hands fumbled with my keys, my breath sharp as I yanked open the door and threw myself inside. Locking the doors, I finally turned to look back at the trail. The figure was gone. I sat there for a long time, trying to steady my breathing. My body trembled for more than just the run. Something was wrong. This wasn't just a prank. Whoever had left that note had meant it, and now they knew I had seen it. I didn't go back to the trail after that. My morning runs were replaced with laps around my neighborhood, where I could see everything around me, but the feeling never fully left. Every time I stepped outside, every time I passed a dark alley or an empty street, I felt the weight of unseen eyes. Days turned into weeks, and the fear should have faded. But sometimes, when I least expected it, I would find small reminders. A shoe left at the edge of my driveway, a note tucked under my windshield wiper. No words, just blank paper, but I knew what it meant. No matter how far I ran, I would never stop looking over my shoulder. Story 4. I unlocked my apartment door, dragging my suitcase inside, relieved to be home after a long vacation. Everything was exactly as I had left it, the living room untouched, the kitchen counters clean. As I stepped toward the hallway, a strange feeling crept over me, something unsettling in the air. The moment I reached the bathroom and flicked on the light, my breath caught in my throat. The mirror was covered in words, smeared in red lipstick, written in hasty, overlapping strokes. Some letters were bold and sharp, others faint, as if wiped away and rewritten. My stomach twisted as I stepped closer, trying to make sense of the chaotic messages. The words blended together, frantic phrases that sent a shiver down my spine. I had locked the apartment before I left, double-checking as always, so there was no way someone could have broken in. No windows were shattered, no doors tampered with, yet these messages hadn't been there when I left. My hand shook as I reached out, running my fingers over the dried lipstick. The thought of someone standing here, writing on my mirror while I was gone, made my skin crawl. I forced myself to read the words, my pulse hammering in my ears. Some phrases made no sense, random strings of letters like someone had been in a panic. Others were disturbingly clear, warnings that made my stomach drop. A few messages were smeared beyond recognition, as if someone had tried to erase them but changed their mind. A single phrase stood out more than the rest, written right in the center of the mirror. It was bigger, bolder, as if whoever wrote it wanted to make sure I saw it first. The words sent a sharp chill down my spine, making my breath hitch. They said I was being watched, that I shouldn't have left, that I wasn't alone. My first instinct was to search my apartment, checking every room, every closet, every shadowed corner. I flung open doors, peered under my bed, and yanked the shower curtain aside. Nothing seemed out of place, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been here, maybe even still was. I checked the locks again, pressing my hand against the deadbolt, testing it with trembling fingers. It was secure, just as I had left it. but that did nothing to ease my fear. Someone had gotten inside, someone had touched my things. Someone had left a message meant for me. My mind raced with possibilities, none of them comforting. I thought about calling the police, but what would I even say? There was no sign of forced entry, nothing stolen, no evidence beyond the smeared lipstick on my mirror. The messages would sound crazy if I tried to explain them. Still, I knew I couldn't just ignore this. Someone had been here, and they had wanted me to know it. I grabbed a towel and wiped at the mirror, my heart pounding as the words smeared into streaks of red. The more I scrubbed, the more it felt like I was erasing something important. A part of me wanted to leave it there, to take pictures, to have proof that this had happened. But the sight of those words made my stomach twist, so I kept wiping until they were gone. Even after the mirror was clean, I felt no relief. The air in my apartment felt thick, heavy with something unseen. Every creak of the floorboards, every faint hum of the pipes made me tense. I tried to tell myself it was all in my head, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. That night, I locked my bedroom door, something I had never done before. The weight of exhaustion pulled at me, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured someone standing in my bathroom, lipstick in hand, writing those frantic messages. I couldn't stop wondering who they were, or worse, if they planned to come back. At some point, exhaustion finally overtook my fear, and I drifted into an uneasy sleep. When I woke, sunlight streamed through my blinds, making the night's terror feel distant. But the unease hadn't faded, lingering beneath the surface like an itch I couldn't scratch. I hesitated before going into the bathroom, dreading what I might find. The mirror was clean, just as I had left it, but something still felt off. I turned on the sink, splashing cold water on my face, trying to shake the lingering fear. As I reached for a towel, my gaze flickered to the edge of the mirror. My breath caught as I saw it, one last message, faint but still there. It was a single word, barely visible, written in the same smeared red lipstick. It hadn't been there the night before, I was sure of it. My fingers trembled as I traced the letters, my stomach twisting into knots. The word was simple, but it made my blood run cold. It said, "Tonight." Story 5. It was a little past midnight when I requested an Uber to take me home. The streets were quiet, with only a few cars passing by, their headlights cutting through the darkness. I was exhausted from a long day, and all I wanted was to get home and sleep. The glow of my phone screen was the only light as I scrolled through social media, barely paying attention to anything around me. The day had been draining, and I had one goal in mind, the comfort of my bed. When the car finally pulled up, I didn't think much of it. I glanced up briefly, noticing the typical black sedan with an Uber sticker on the window. The driver was a middle-aged man, wearing a dark jacket, his features obscured by the shadows of the night. I didn't think to study him too closely. It wasn't unusual for drivers to be quiet. Many preferred to drive in peace. I climbed into the back seat without a second thought. The first few minutes of the ride were uneventful. The car was comfortable, the soft hum of the tires on the road the only sound. I was still distracted by my phone, mindlessly scrolling through messages and news articles. My eyes occasionally flicked up to check the road, reassured by the app's navigation that everything was on track. The route seemed normal. The driver didn't say a word, and I didn't mind. Silence was fine with me. But then, without warning, the car slowed, and the driver reached over to press a button on his phone. The familiar voice of the GPS navigation, normally guiding us with its polite turn left or continue straight, suddenly went silent. I looked up from my phone, blinking in confusion. The sudden quiet felt jarring. "I know a shortcut," the driver said, his voice calm but firm. There was something about the way he spoke that immediately raised a red flag. It wasn't the friendly, casual tone I'd expected. Instead, it was more insistent, as though he had made up his mind and didn't need my input. I swallowed hard, the pit in my stomach growing. "I'd rather just stick to the route. Thanks," I said, my voice carefully neutral. There was no reason to panic, not yet. Maybe it was a simple mistake. Maybe he thought he could save some time. But instead of acknowledging my request, he kept his eyes on the road and continued driving. The car veered off the main street without warning, turning onto a narrow, dimly lit road that didn't look familiar. I tried not to let my unease show, but my heart started to race. The buildings around us grew sparse, and the streetlights became fewer, replaced by patches of darkness. The further we went, the more isolated the area felt. I checked my phone again, but the Uber app was now useless. The map had frozen, and the little arrow indicating my location was spinning in place, unable to give me any useful information. My mind raced. This wasn't right. I'd been in enough Ubers to know that drivers typically stuck to the mapped route, unless they had a very good reason not to. This felt wrong. "Seriously, I'd rather go the normal way," I said again, my voice firmer this time. My hands gripped the edge of the seat, fingers pressing into the upholstery as I tried to steady myself. The driver didn't respond immediately. The only sound was the steady hum of the tires against the asphalt. He didn't even look at me, his hands gripping the wheel tightly. I glanced out the window again, noticing how desolate the area had become. The buildings had turned into empty lots, and the few cars on the road had long since disappeared. "I'm serious," I continued, my voice shaky now. "I want to go the normal way." The words felt like a plea, but I needed to be clear. His grip on the steering wheel tightened, and I noticed his knuckles going white. For a few seconds, there was no response. The air in the car felt heavier, more suffocating. He was deliberately ignoring me. My mind raced with all the possible scenarios, none of them comforting. "Relax," he finally muttered, his voice dismissive. "It's a shortcut." I could hear the impatience in his tone, as if he was annoyed by my insistence, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. I glanced nervously at the door handle, my mind racing with the thought that I might have to get out of the car. "Stop the car," I said, trying to sound more authoritative. I was shaking, but I wouldn't let him see that. "I want to get out." He didn't respond right away, but I could see his jaw tighten. For a long moment we drove in silence, the eerie emptiness of the streets around us pressing in from all sides. My heart was pounding now, a frantic rhythm that felt too loud in the quiet of the car. Suddenly the car slowed, as if he was considering pulling over. My chance. I reached for the door handle, my fingers trembling. "Stop the car," I repeated, louder this time. He shot me a glance, his eyes cold, unreadable, and then he let out a sharp sigh of frustration. The car slowed further, but instead of stopping completely, he simply eased up on the brakes, letting the vehicle roll to a crawl. I didn't wait. The moment the car had slowed enough, I yanked the door open. The air hit me like a cold slap, and my feet hit the pavement with an unsteady thud. My legs shook as I stumbled away from the car, my heart racing in my chest. I didn't dare look back. The car hesitated for a moment, but then, with a screech of tires, it sped off into the night. I stood there, my body trembling, trying to catch my breath. The sound of the engine fading into the distance was the only thing that reassured me. I pulled out my phone, fingers shaking as I checked my location. I was farther from home than I had realized, in a part of the city I didn't recognize. Panic surged through me, but I forced myself to focus. I turned and began walking quickly, keeping an eye on my surroundings. The streets were almost completely deserted, and the few lights that flickered overhead did little to ease my anxiety. I had to get out of this neighborhood back to somewhere familiar. Eventually, I found a gas station, its bright lights a welcome sight in the midst of the darkness. I stepped inside, my breath still uneven, and the cashier gave me a quick glance but didn't say anything. I tried to calm myself, telling myself it was over. I could handle this. I called for another ride, this time checking everything twice: the driver's name, the license plate, the route. When the car arrived, I hesitated at first, my body still tense, my mind replaying everything that had just happened. But the driver seemed normal, and this time I made it home without incident. Once inside, I reported the first driver through the app. My fingers trembled as I typed out everything, making sure to include every detail. It wasn't just about me, I didn't want anyone else to experience what I had. I never found out what the driver's intentions were that night. Maybe he had meant no harm, or maybe I had avoided something much worse. But one thing was certain: I would never ignore my instincts again. And I would never forget that night, the cold silence of the car, and the feeling that something dark had been lurking just beneath the surface. Story 6. I was walking to my car in the dimly lit parking garage, my footsteps echoing against the concrete. It had been a long day, and I just wanted to get home. As I reached into my pocket for my keys, I heard another set of footsteps behind me, steady and deliberate. A chill ran down my spine as I turned around, my heart pounding in my chest. A man stood a few feet away, holding a bundle of zip ties in his hands. His expression was unreadable, but something about the way he stared at me sent a wave of fear through my body. I gripped my keys tightly, forcing myself to stay calm. My car was only a few steps away, but he was blocking the path. He took a slow step forward, and I instinctively stepped back, my breath coming in short gasps. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't answer, just tilted his head slightly, as if assessing me. My stomach twisted as I realized no one else was around, and my phone was buried deep in my bag. I glanced at the nearest exit, wondering if I could make a run for it. He must have noticed because his grip on the zip ties tightened. My pulse pounded in my ears as I tried to think of a way out. Without another word, I turned sharply and sprinted toward my car, fumbling with my keys. I could hear him behind me, his footsteps quickening. My hands shook as I jammed the key into the lock, cursing myself for not having automatic locks. Just as I yanked the door open, a strong hand grabbed my arm, yanking me back. A strangled cry escaped my lips as I struggled against his grip. His other hand reached for the zip ties, and panic surged through me. I twisted violently, slamming my elbow into his ribs. He let out a grunt but didn't let go. Using every ounce of strength, I stomped hard on his foot and yanked myself free, stumbling against the side of my car. I dove into the driver's seat, slamming the door shut just as he lunged forward. He pounded on the window, his face contorted with anger. My hands trembled as I turned the key in the ignition, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The engine roared to life, and I threw the car into reverse, my tires screeching against the concrete. He stepped back just in time to avoid getting hit, but he didn't run. He just stood there, watching as I sped away. I didn't stop until I was out of the parking garage, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. My heart was still racing, my skin clammy with sweat. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see him following me. When I finally reached a main road, I pulled over, my body shaking. I grabbed my phone with trembling fingers and dialed 911, my voice barely steady enough to explain what had happened. The dispatcher assured me help was on the way. The police arrived within minutes, their flashing lights cutting through the darkness. An officer approached my car, his expression serious. I stepped out, still shaken, and recounted everything to him. They searched the garage but found no sign of the man. It was as if he had disappeared the moment I left. The officer asked if I had seen him before, but I shook my head. He was a stranger, but one I would never forget. They checked security footage, but the cameras in that area had been malfunctioning. My stomach dropped at the realization that if he had caught me, no one would have known what happened. The officer assured me they would patrol the area, but the unease remained. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Every sound outside my window made me jolt awake, my mind replaying the moment his hand grabbed my arm. The thought of what could have happened haunted me. The next day, I couldn't shake the paranoia that he was still out there. I parked closer to entrances, constantly checking over my shoulder. Every time I saw a man with a similar build, my heart pounded in fear. Days turned into weeks, and while the fear dulled, it never fully faded. I stopped going to that parking garage, even during the day. I made sure to always have my keys ready, my phone in hand, and my senses sharp. Even now, I wonder what he wanted. Was it a robbery or something worse? The zip ties told me all I needed to know. He had planned something, and I had narrowly escaped. I never got any closure, no arrests, no leads. He was just a shadow in the night, a nightmare that never fully left me. But one thing was certain: I would never let my guard down again. Story 7. My dog, Max, had been acting strangely for days, growling and barking at my bedroom closet every night. At first, I dismissed it as him reacting to shadows or a lingering scent, but his agitation only grew worse. He would stand rigid in front of the closet, his ears pinned back, a deep rumble in his throat that made my skin crawl. One evening, after another restless night of his barking, I decided to check inside the closet again. I moved aside my hanging clothes and boxes, searching for anything unusual. That's when I noticed something near the back, a small hole in the wall, barely the size of a quarter. I leaned in closer, my breath catching as I examined it. The hole was smooth around the edges, as if it had been carefully carved out rather than accidental damage. A cold sensation settled in my chest when I realized it was positioned at the perfect height for someone to peer through from the other side. A chill ran down my spine as I stepped back, suddenly aware of how vulnerable I had been. My mind raced with possibilities. Was someone watching me while I slept? The thought made me sick, my stomach twisting as I swallowed the rising fear. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, shining it into the hole. The other side revealed nothing but darkness, but there was a faint, musty scent, like damp wood and something else I couldn't place. I pressed my ear against the wall, straining to hear any movement, but the silence felt heavy, oppressive. Max whined beside me, his tail stiff, his eyes locked on the hole. I reached out and touched the wall around it, my fingers brushing against rough edges and small indentations. There were signs of wear, faint smudges, as if someone had pressed their face against it over and over again. I pulled away quickly, my pulse hammering in my ears. If there was a hole, then that meant there had to be a space behind the wall. My house was old, but I had never considered the possibility of hidden crawl spaces. The thought sent a shudder through me as I grabbed my flashlight and hesitated. I needed to know what was back there, even though every instinct screamed at me to leave it alone. Steeling myself, I moved to the hallway where an old access panel led to a narrow gap between the walls. I had never opened it before, but my hands were already working at the latch before I could second-guess myself. The panel groaned as it swung open, revealing a cramped, dust-filled passage barely wide enough for a person to crawl through. The air inside was stale, carrying the unmistakable scent of something rotten. My flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the narrow space ahead. My stomach dropped when I saw what was inside. A flattened pillow, an old blanket, and empty food wrappers were scattered along the wooden beams. Someone had been living here, hiding just inches away from me. The very thought made my skin crawl, my throat tightening as I stepped back. Max let out a low growl. His hackles raised as he stared into the darkness. I could feel the sweat on my palms as I scanned the space for any sign of movement. Whoever had been here wasn't there now, but they had left behind proof of their presence, proof that they had been watching. I turned my flashlight toward the wall separating the space from my closet. The hole was even more unsettling from this side, an almost perfect circle carved into the wood. The idea of someone crouched here, night after night, staring through it made my stomach lurch. A sudden noise made me freeze, a soft creak coming from deeper in the passage. My heart slammed against my ribs as I spun my light toward the sound. The passage stretched further than I had realized, disappearing into shadows that my flashlight couldn't reach. I swallowed hard, every nerve in my body screaming for me to run. I couldn't stay in this house, knowing someone had been living inside the walls. My mind raced as I backed away, keeping my eyes on the darkened space, half expecting something or someone to emerge. As soon as I was back in my room, I slammed the closet door shut and locked it, even though I knew it wouldn't make a difference. My hands trembled as I dialed the police, struggling to find the words to explain what I had found. Max stayed close to me, his ears twitching at every faint sound. The officers arrived within minutes, their presence doing little to calm my nerves. I led them to the access panel, my pulse still racing as they stepped inside. They moved cautiously, their flashlights sweeping over the cramped space, their expressions grim. One of them called me over, his voice serious. He pointed to something near the back wall, deep scratches in the wood, marks that looked like they had been made with fingernails. The officer's face was unreadable, but his next word sent a fresh wave of terror through me. "There's another exit," he said, motioning to a section of the wall that had been crudely pulled apart. It led outside, into the dense brush behind my house. Whoever had been here was gone, but they had left recently. A sickening realization settled over me. I had been sleeping just feet away from someone who had been moving through my house unnoticed, watching, waiting. The officers assured me they would search the area, but I already knew they wouldn't find anyone. That night, I couldn't bring myself to stay in the house. I packed a bag, grabbed Max, and left without looking back. The thought of returning made my skin crawl, the feeling of unseen eyes still lingering in the back of my mind. I never found out who had been living in my walls or how long they had been there. The police didn't have any leads, and after a few weeks the investigation quietly faded away. But I knew the truth: someone had been there, someone had been watching me. Even now, in a new place, far from that house, I sometimes wake up in the middle of the night to Max growling at a dark corner. And every time my chest tightens with fear, wondering if I ever truly left that nightmare behind. Story 8. I was cleaning out my kitchen drawer when I found the key. It was small, brass, and slightly worn, sitting beneath a pile of old receipts and rubber bands. I didn't recognize it, and for a moment, I wondered if it had belonged to the previous tenant. Turning it over in my hand, I tried to recall if I had ever seen it before. It wasn't attached to anything, no label or keychain, just a bare key with an unfamiliar design. I set it aside, thinking I'd figure it out later, and continued with my cleaning. That night, as I got ready for bed, the key's existence nagged at me. It felt oddly deliberate, like it had been left there for a reason. I picked it up again, feeling its weight, and wondered what it might unlock. The next morning, I went through my apartment, testing it on every lock I could find. It didn't fit my front door, my mailbox, or the cabinets in my kitchen. Just as I was about to give up, my eyes landed on the closet in my bedroom. I had lived in this apartment for nearly a year, but I never paid much attention to the closet's corners. I pushed aside a stack of old boxes and noticed something I had never seen before. Tucked into the back wall was a small metal lockbox. My pulse quickened as I knelt in front of it. The box was dusty, showing signs of age, with a small keyhole at the front. I reached for the key, suddenly feeling nervous about what I might find inside. It fit perfectly. With a quiet click, the lock turned, and I hesitated before lifting the lid. Inside there was a folded piece of paper, a small notebook, and what looked like an old photograph. I picked up the photograph first. It was black and white, worn at the edges, showing a man standing in front of what looked like my apartment door. Something about his face unsettled me. Setting it aside, I unfolded the paper. The handwriting was neat but faded, the words short and direct. "Do not let him in. He knows." My stomach tightened as I reread the message. I turned to the notebook, flipping through its pages. Most of them were blank, except for a few entries near the beginning. The first one was dated nearly 15 years ago. "Something is wrong here. I hear knocking at night, but when I check, no one is there. I thought I was imagining things, but now I know I'm not." The next entry was written a few days later. "He stands at the door sometimes. I see his shadow through the peephole, but when I open the door, the hallway is empty. I don't know what he wants." I felt a chill run through me as I read on. The entries became more frantic, detailing nights of whispered voices and the sense of being watched. The final entry was short. "He's inside." I snapped the notebook shut and glanced around my bedroom, suddenly feeling exposed. The air in the apartment felt heavier, as if something unseen had shifted. I hadn't noticed anything strange before, but now I wasn't sure. That night, I locked my bedroom door, unable to shake the unease settling in my chest. Every sound in the apartment felt amplified, the creaks of the old building making me tense. I stared at the closet, wondering who had left that lockbox behind. Sleep didn't come easily. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of knocking. It was faint, barely noticeable, but enough to make my breath catch. I sat up, straining to listen. The knocking came again, this time closer. It wasn't from the front door. It was coming from inside my apartment. My heart pounded as I reached for my phone, unsure of what to do. I turned on the bedside lamp and scanned the room. The closet door was slightly open, though I was sure I had shut it before bed. I forced myself to get up, my hands trembling as I reached for the handle. Inside, everything was as I had left it. The lockbox remained on the floor, its contents still spread out, but the air inside the closet felt wrong, colder than the rest of the room. I closed the door and backed away, unwilling to turn my back to it. I checked the front door's locks twice before returning to bed. Sleep felt impossible with the memory of that last notebook entry lingering in my mind. For the next few days, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I would catch glimpses of movement in the corner of my eye, only to turn and find nothing there. My apartment, once familiar, now felt foreign. One evening, as I sat on the couch, my phone vibrated with a notification. It was my building's security camera app, alerting me to movement outside my door. I hesitated before opening it. The footage showed a dark figure standing just beyond the camera's range. The hallway lights flickered, making it hard to see his face. He didn't move, just stood there, staring at my door. A sudden knock made me jump. It wasn't loud, just a soft, deliberate tapping. My fingers hovered over my phone, debating whether to call someone. The figure outside didn't leave. Minutes passed, each second stretching unbearably. Then, without warning, the figure turned and walked away. The notification ended, and the hallway was empty once more. I didn't sleep that night. I kept the lockbox beside me, the key still in my hand. The warning on the paper echoed in my mind. I didn't know who he was, but I knew one thing for certain. I wouldn't open the door. Story 9. I had been driving for hours, the empty highway stretching endlessly ahead. The glow of my headlights illuminated the dark road, the occasional reflective sign flashing past. It was the kind of night where the world felt utterly still, the only sound being the steady hum of my engine. Out of nowhere, a pair of headlights appeared in my rearview mirror, growing larger by the second. The car behind me was approaching fast, its beams casting long shadows inside my vehicle. I kept my hands steady on the wheel, thinking they would just pass, but instead, they swerved aggressively into my lane. I jerked the wheel to avoid them, my tires skidding slightly on the pavement. My heart pounded as the other car pulled up alongside me, keeping pace. Its windows were tinted, and I couldn't see the driver, but I could feel their presence watching, waiting. Suddenly, they swerved toward me again, their front bumper nearly clipping mine. I veered toward the shoulder, struggling to keep control as gravel crunched beneath my tires. A surge of fear shot through me as I realized this wasn't some reckless driver, it was intentional. I pressed my foot harder on the gas, trying to create distance, but they matched my speed effortlessly. The road stretched ahead, empty and endless, no exits in sight. I didn't know how long this would go on, but I knew I had to stay on the road, stay in control. They jerked their car toward me again, more forcefully this time, nearly running me off the pavement. My heart slammed against my ribs as I yanked the wheel, barely avoiding a skid. The car backed off for a second, but I knew they weren't done. I reached for my phone, but my hands were shaking too much to dial. My focus had to stay on the road, on the car beside me. The driver's window rolled down slightly, but I still couldn't see their face, just a faint outline in the darkness. They accelerated suddenly, swerving ahead of me and slamming on their brakes. My tires screeched as I reacted, barely avoiding a collision. My breath came in short gasps, adrenaline surging through me as I tried to think of a way out. The road was still empty, not a single car in sight. I tried to remember the last time I had passed an exit, but everything felt like a blur. The car in front of me slowed down almost to a crawl, forcing me to either brake or go around them. I hesitated for a moment, then swerved into the opposite lane, flooring the gas. My heart pounded as I pulled ahead, hoping they would give up. But my relief was short-lived when their headlights appeared in my mirror once again. They were right behind me, gaining speed quickly. The engine of their car roared as they closed the distance, their front bumper nearly touching mine. I gritted my teeth, gripping the wheel tightly, refusing to let panic take over. Up ahead, I saw a green highway sign, my only hope for escape. There was an exit a mile ahead, though I had no idea where it led. I made a split-second decision, easing my foot off the gas, letting them get closer. As soon as they were nearly beside me again, I yanked the wheel toward the exit, my tires screeching against the pavement. The car rocketed onto the ramp, my body pressing against the seat as I tried to regain control. My hands trembled as I checked the mirror, praying they wouldn't follow. The highway disappeared behind me, the road narrowing into a small, winding path. My breath came in short gasps, my pulse still racing. For a brief moment I thought I had lost them, that I was safe. Then headlights appeared at the top of the exit ramp, the same car speeding toward me. A fresh wave of fear coursed through me as I realized they weren't giving up. I pushed the gas pedal down, my car lurching forward, desperate to find somewhere to hide. The road ahead was lined with trees, dark and dense, offering no real place to pull over. I kept driving, scanning for any sign of life: a gas station, a house, anything. The other car was closing in again, its headlights burning in my mirror. Then, I saw a small roadside rest stop up ahead. The dim glow of a vending machine and a single parked truck were the only signs of life. It wasn't much, but it was my only shot. I turned sharply, my tires screeching as I pulled into the lot. My headlights swept across the pavement, catching the outline of a man standing beside his truck. He turned toward me, startled by my sudden arrival. Behind me, the pursuing car hesitated at the entrance before speeding off, disappearing into the darkness. My entire body sagged with relief as I exhaled shakily. The truck driver walked toward me, concern etched on his face. "You okay?" he asked, his voice deep and steady. I nodded, but my hands were still shaking on the wheel. He glanced toward the road, then back at me, as if sensing something was wrong. I swallowed hard, still trying to process everything. "There was a car," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "They were trying to run me off the road." His expression darkened, his gaze shifting back toward the empty highway. "You sure they're gone?" he asked. I wasn't sure of anything, but I nodded anyway, not wanting to seem paranoid. For a long moment we stood there in silence, the night stretching endlessly around us. My pulse was still racing, my skin clammy with fear. The reality of what had just happened was finally sinking in. "Maybe wait here a bit," the trucker said finally. "No point getting back on the road just yet." I nodded, realizing I had no other option. My body was too shaken, my mind still replaying the terrifying chase. I sat in my car, staring out at the road, half expecting the headlights to return. The trucker leaned against his rig, keeping an eye on the highway. I didn't know who had been after me, but I knew one thing: I had barely escaped. And whoever they were, they had wanted me off the road for good. Story 10. The small shop was nearly empty that night, just the hum of the refrigerators and the occasional flicker of the overhead lights keeping me company. I had worked the evening shift plenty of times before, but something about that night felt off. The quiet seemed heavier than usual, pressing in from all sides. I busied myself at the counter, counting change to pass the time. The bell above the door jingled, and I looked up to see a man step inside. He was tall, dressed in a dark hoodie with the hood down, and his hands were shoved into his pockets. His face was expressionless, his eyes fixed on me as he stood just inside the entrance. I swallowed hard, trying to ignore the discomfort creeping up my spine. He didn't move toward the aisles or the shelves like most customers did. Instead, he stood there, staring at me without a word. The seconds stretched painfully long, my pulse picking up as I forced myself to hold his gaze. The silence was suffocating, and I finally managed to ask, "Can I help you?" He didn't respond. His head tilted slightly as if studying me, and then, just as abruptly as he had entered, he turned and walked out. The door jingled again, and the air inside the shop felt noticeably colder. I exhaled, only then realizing I had been holding my breath. I stepped around the counter and glanced out the front window, but he was already gone. The street outside was empty, except for the dim glow of the streetlights reflecting off the pavement. A shiver ran down my arms as I turned back to my station. Something about the way he had looked at me unsettled me. Minutes passed, and I tried to shake the unease creeping through my body. I kept glancing at the door, expecting him to return, but the shop remained quiet. I reached for my phone, considering texting a friend just to have a distraction. That was when the store phone rang. The sound made me jump, my fingers tightening around the edge of the counter. It was unusual for the phone to ring this late, and I hesitated before picking it up. Pressing it to my ear, I forced out a steady greeting. The line crackled with silence for a few seconds before a voice finally spoke. "Why do you look so scared?" My blood ran cold. The voice was deep and slow, every word deliberate. My grip on the phone tightened, my heart hammering against my ribs. I turned my head toward the front window, half expecting to see the man standing outside. The street remained empty, but I could feel him watching. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breathing. "Who is this?" My voice came out quieter than I intended, barely above a whisper. The line stayed silent for a moment before a faint chuckle echoed through the receiver. My stomach twisted at the sound. Click. The call ended, leaving nothing but the dull hum of the dial tone. I lowered the phone slowly, my fingers trembling as I placed it back on the counter. I scanned the store again, every shadow suddenly feeling deeper, every corner darker than before. I stepped back toward the register, my hands clenching into fists at my sides. Maybe it was a prank, someone messing with me for fun. But the way he had looked at me, the way his voice sounded over the phone, made me doubt that. I tried to shake the paranoia creeping up my spine. The minutes dragged on, the shop suffocating in its stillness. I considered calling someone, maybe my manager or even the police, but what would I say? A man stared at me and then called to scare me. It sounded ridiculous. I forced myself to take a deep breath. Another 20 minutes passed and I kept my eyes fixed on the door. The shop was supposed to close soon and I counted down the minutes, each one stretching longer than the last. My nerves were still on edge, every sound making my body tense. Finally, I started shutting things down, eager to get out. I turned off a few lights and grabbed my bag, but just as I reached for the door, my stomach dropped. Through the glass, I saw him again. He was standing across the street, directly under the glow of a flickering street lamp. He wasn't moving, just standing there staring. The distance between us felt far too small, the glass door no longer feeling like enough of a barrier. My breath hitched, my fingers hovering over the lock. I knew I should call someone, but fear held me in place. The street lamp flickered again, and for the briefest moment, his figure was swallowed by darkness. When the light returned, he was gone. My heart slammed against my chest, my head whipping left and right, searching for him. He had vanished into the night. I didn't wait another second. I locked the door, my hands shaking as I hurried to the back exit. My car was parked in the alley behind the shop, and I forced myself to keep moving, every instinct screaming at me to run. The air outside felt colder than before, the night pressing in around me. I reached my car, fumbling for my keys. My hands were shaking so badly it took me 3 tries to get the door unlocked. I slid inside, locking the doors the moment I was in. My breathing was fast and uneven, my pulse pounding in my ears. I started the engine, my fingers gripping the steering wheel like a lifeline. I didn't waste time checking my surroundings, I just hit the gas and drove. The empty streets blurred past as I sped home, my body running on pure adrenaline. When I finally reached my apartment, I sat in the car for a moment, gripping the wheel with white-knuckled fingers. The night outside felt heavier than usual, the shadows stretching longer than they should. I scanned the parking lot, half expecting to see him standing there. I forced myself to move, rushing to my door and locking it the second I stepped inside. My hands still trembled as I leaned against the door, trying to steady my breath. The eerie silence of my apartment felt almost too quiet. I reached for my phone and checked the call log. The number that had called the store was listed as unknown. A cold shiver crawled up my spine as I stared at the screen. The logical part of my mind told me it was over, that I was safe. But deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. Story 11. The afternoon air was crisp as I walked down the quiet street, the usual hum of traffic distant. I passed by a construction site that had been there for weeks, fenced off with metal barriers and warning signs. The skeletal frame of an unfinished building stood tall, surrounded by scattered materials. I had walked this route many times before and never thought much of it. As I neared the entrance, a man in a hard hat stepped out from behind the fence. He wore a dusty, reflective vest over a long-sleeved shirt, his face partially shadowed by the brim of his helmet. His posture was rigid, and he lifted a hand in warning. "You shouldn't be here," he said firmly, his voice carrying over the quiet street. I hesitated, confused by his sudden appearance. "I'm just passing by," I replied, glancing around. The site was empty except for him, no workers, no sounds of construction. The air was still, save for the faint rustling of plastic tarps caught in the breeze. The man shook his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "It's not safe," he said, taking a step closer. There was something unsettling about his presence, something that made my skin prickle. I nodded quickly and kept walking, resisting the urge to look back. As I put distance between myself and the site, my unease didn't fade. Something about the man felt off, though I couldn't pinpoint why. His warning echoed in my mind, seeming more like an order than a concern for safety. By the time I reached my apartment, I had nearly convinced myself I was overthinking it. That night, curiosity got the better of me. I searched online for any updates on the construction project, wondering if there had been an accident or delay. But there was nothing, no news, no notices, no reports. The last update was weeks ago, stating that work had been postponed indefinitely. A chill ran through me as I reread the article. If no construction was scheduled, then why was that man there? And why had he acted as if I was intruding? My mind raced with possibilities, but none of them made sense. The next morning, I decided to walk by again. The site looked exactly as it had before, silent, still, abandoned. The entrance was sealed shut with a heavy chain, the padlock coated in dust and rust. No sign of the man, no footprints, no indication that anyone had been there recently. I stood there for a long moment, watching for movement beyond the fence. The place felt different now, emptier, as if it had been untouched for years. A strange sensation crept over me, an instinctive urge to leave. I turned away quickly, my pulse uneven. Throughout the day, the encounter lingered in my thoughts. I tried to push it aside, telling myself I must have misunderstood the situation. Maybe he was a security guard, or maybe I had missed some announcement about the work resuming. Yet deep down, I didn't believe that. That evening, I spoke to a friend who lived nearby and asked if they had noticed any activity at the site. They frowned, shaking their head. "No one's worked there for a long time," they said. "They stopped after some issue with permits." "Why?" I hesitated, unsure how to explain without sounding paranoid. "I just saw someone there yesterday," I said finally. "He told me I shouldn't be there." My friend's expression darkened slightly, and they glanced toward the window. "That's weird," they murmured. "I pass by there all the time, and it's always empty." Their words only deepened my unease, confirming that something wasn't right. If the site had been abandoned for weeks, who was the man I saw? That night, sleep came in restless waves, my dreams filled with images of the empty construction site. I kept seeing the man in the hard hat, standing motionless beyond the fence, his face hidden in shadow. His words echoed in my head over and over. I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart hammering. By morning, my curiosity had turned into something else, a gnawing need for answers. I decided to return to the site, determined to look closer. The street was quiet as I approached, the air heavy with an unnatural stillness. The site loomed ahead, unchanged, as if frozen in time. I moved toward the fence, gripping the cold metal tightly. Through the gaps, I scanned the interior, searching for any signs of life. The skeletal structure of the building stood empty, the ground littered with abandoned materials. Nothing stirred, not even the wind. Just as I was about to step back, a faint sound broke the silence. It was soft, distant, but unmistakable, the sound of footsteps on gravel. My breath caught as I strained to see deeper inside. The noise stopped abruptly, as if whoever it was had sensed my presence. A wave of dread washed over me, my instincts screaming to leave. I turned sharply, my steps quickening as I put distance between myself and the site. The sensation of being watched clung to me, prickling against my skin. Even after I was blocks away, I couldn't shake the feeling. That night, I told myself I wouldn't go back. There was no logical explanation, and I didn't want to invite more unease into my life. But just as I was settling into sleep, a thought surfaced. What if I had seen something I wasn't supposed to? The man's warning suddenly carried a new weight. Days passed, but the experience stayed with me. I avoided the street, choosing a longer route just to keep my distance. The feeling of unease never fully left, lingering in the back of my mind like an unanswered question. Some part of me knew that I would never get a real explanation. One afternoon, I overheard a conversation at a nearby cafe that made my blood run cold. Two older men were discussing the abandoned construction site, their voices low. They shut it down after that worker went missing, one said. No one ever found him. My breath caught as I leaned in slightly, trying to catch every word. The other man shook his head. Strangest thing, he muttered. Some say they still see someone walking around in there, but no one's supposed to be there anymore. A chill crept down my spine as the realization settled in. The man I saw, the one who warned me I would never know if he was real. But one thing was certain. I had listened to him, and for that I was grateful. Story 12. House sitting for my friend was supposed to be an easy favor. The house was in a quiet neighborhood, tucked between rows of identical suburban homes. I spent most of the evening watching TV, occasionally checking my phone for any messages. The hours passed uneventfully until the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, and for a moment, I debated whether to answer. Peering through the peephole, I saw a man standing on the porch. He was holding something in his hand, his expression unreadable. A chill ran through me as I hesitated before finally opening the door just a crack. "Can I help you?" My voice was steady, though my fingers tightened around the door handle. The man said nothing at first, just lifting the object in his hand. It was a photograph, and when I looked closer, my breath caught in my throat. It was a picture of me inside the house, taken from outside one of the windows. My stomach twisted as I stared at it, my mind scrambling for an explanation. "Where did you get this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. The man didn't answer immediately, his gaze fixed on me in an unsettling way. "You should be more careful," he finally said. His voice was low, almost emotionless. He held the picture out as if expecting me to take it, but I didn't move. Every instinct screamed at me to shut the door, but my feet remained frozen in place. "How did you take this?" I demanded, glancing past him toward the street. There were no cars nearby, no signs of anyone else around. The neighborhood was eerily quiet, the only sound the faint rustling of leaves in the wind. The man tilted his head slightly, as if considering his response. "I just thought you should see it," he said. "You're not as alone as you think." The way he said it sent a shiver through me, and before I could say anything else, he turned and walked away. I slammed the door shut, locking it before stepping back. My hands were shaking as I stared down at the photograph still clutched in my fingers. The angle of the shot suggested it had been taken from the backyard, just beyond the patio. Heart pounding, I rushed to the nearest window, peering out into the darkness. The yard stretched out in eerie silence, the fence standing tall along the perimeter. I couldn't see anyone there, but that didn't mean no one was watching. Forcing myself to stay calm, I double-checked all the locks, making sure every door and window was secure. The house suddenly felt too big, too exposed. I reached for my phone, my fingers trembling as I dialed my friend's number. She picked up on the third ring, her voice groggy from sleep. I quickly explained what had happened, my words tumbling out in a rush. She was silent for a moment before asking me to check something. "Look at the back of the photo," she said. My pulse raced as I turned it over, dread coiling in my stomach. Scrawled in red ink were 3 words that made my blood run cold. "I see you." My breath hitched, and I clenched the phone tighter. "What the hell is this?" I whispered. My friend exhaled sharply on the other end. "Lock the doors. I'm calling the police." The call ended, and I felt a rising sense of unease settle in my chest. I paced the living room, my eyes darting to every window, every shadowed corner. The minutes crawled by, stretching unbearably long. Then, I heard a faint tapping sound. My body went rigid as I pinpointed the noise coming from the back door. Someone was there. Slowly I crept toward the kitchen, every muscle tensed. The glass door leading to the patio was dark, the outside world a void of shadows. My reflection stared back at me, but beyond it, I could make out a shape. A figure stood just beyond the glass, unmoving. I swallowed hard, my breath shallow. My fingers hovered over the phone, ready to call the police myself. Before I could dial, the figure took a step closer, pressing something against the glass. Another photo. I didn't move, my body frozen with fear. The picture showed me again, but this time I wasn't alone. The second figure loomed just behind me, barely visible in the dim light of the house. I spun around, my heart hammering against my ribs. The room was empty, but the suffocating feeling of being watched grew stronger. My vision blurred with panic as I stumbled back. A loud knock on the front door jolted me, followed by the distant wail of sirens. I rushed to the door, peering through the peephole once more. 2 police officers stood outside, scanning the porch with cautious expressions. My hands fumbled with the lock as I yanked the door open. They stepped inside quickly, their eyes sharp with concern. "Are you the one who called?" one of them asked. I nodded frantically, explaining everything as best as I could. They exchanged glances before one officer moved toward the backyard. I followed hesitantly, my breath still shaky. The patio door was wide open, though I knew I had locked it earlier. The photo was still there, taped to the glass. The officer peeled it away, his expression darkening. "We'll check the perimeter," he said. "Stay inside and keep the doors locked." I did as I was told, retreating to the living room while they searched the property. The wait was agonizing, every sound making me jump. After what felt like an eternity, the officers returned. They found no one. No footprints, no sign of forced entry, nothing to suggest someone had been there at all. But the pictures remained cold, undeniable proof that someone had been watching. One of the officers handed the photographs to me. "Have you noticed anything strange before tonight?" he asked. I shook my head, still unable to wrap my mind around it. "If anything else happens, call us immediately," the officer said firmly. I nodded, clutching the photos tightly as they left. The silence that followed was heavier than before. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the house set my nerves on edge, every passing shadow making my stomach churn. By morning, I had made up my mind I was leaving. I called my friend and told her everything. She was horrified, apologizing over and over, but I didn't blame her. I just knew I couldn't stay there another night. As I packed my things, I glanced at the back door one last time. A faint smudge was visible on the glass, as if someone had pressed their fingers against it. My skin crawled as I turned away, my only goal now to put as much distance as possible between me and that house. Story 13. Renting the storage unit was supposed to be a simple solution. My apartment was too small, and I needed a place to keep the things I wasn't ready to part with. The facility was clean, well lit, and seemed secure enough. The manager handed me the key, and I drove down the long row of units to find mine. I slid open the metal door and took a quick look inside. The space was empty, except for a single bare light bulb hanging from the ceiling. I started unloading my boxes, stacking them neatly along the back wall. As I turned to lock up, something caught my eye near the corner of the hallway. A small, black camera was mounted on the wall, aimed directly at my unit. It wasn't part of the facility's security system, at least not one I had noticed before. The angle was specific, as if someone had set it up to watch my door alone. A cold feeling crept over me as I stepped closer, examining it. The camera was small, with no visible wires. It had been attached with a piece of strong adhesive, placed at just the right height to capture anyone coming or going. My first thought was that maybe it belonged to the storage company, but I had seen their official security cameras near the entrances, not down individual hallways. Something about this felt off. I glanced around, but the hall was empty. The quiet hum of overhead lights filled the space, making the silence feel heavier. I considered knocking on a few nearby units to see if anyone else had noticed it, but something held me back. Instead, I reached out and carefully peeled the camera off the wall. Holding it in my hand, I examined it closely. The lens was still pointed at me, a tiny red light blinking at the side. Someone was watching, or at least had been. My stomach twisted at the thought, and I quickly stuffed the camera into my pocket. Locking my unit, I walked back to my car, my mind racing. Who would install a camera like that? And why my unit? I scanned the lot as I got in, half expecting to see someone watching from a distance. But the place was empty, just rows of identical metal doors stretching in both directions. Once I got home, I placed the camera on my kitchen table. It was lightweight, no bigger than my palm. I didn't know much about these kinds of things, but it looked like it could be wireless. That meant someone could be watching remotely, seeing every time I came and went. I debated bringing it back to the storage manager, but something about that didn't sit right. If this was someone else's setup, they would just remove the evidence and act like nothing happened. Instead, I grabbed a small screwdriver and pried open the casing. Inside, there was a tiny memory card. My pulse quickened as I pulled it out, setting it beside my laptop. Plugging it in, I waited as the files loaded. There were dozens of video clips, each time stamped over the past few weeks. clicking on the most recent one. My screen filled with grainy footage. It showed the hallway of the storage facility, the camera's view fixed on my unit door. I watched as I arrived earlier that day, unlocking the door and carrying in my boxes. The footage ended just as I reached for the camera. A chill ran through me as I scrolled further back. More clips, all showing my unit. Some showed nothing but an empty hallway. Others captured people walking by, but none of them stopped. Then I saw one clip, taken late at night, showed a figure standing in front of my unit. The person was dressed in dark clothing, their face hidden under a hood. They stood motionless, just outside my door. My chest tightened as I watched them reach up and press something against the wall of the camera. Then, without hesitation, they turned and walked away. I rewound, pausing on their silhouette. There were no clear features, nothing to identify them. But the way they moved, the calm and deliberate way they had set up the camera, sent a deep unease through me. They weren't in a hurry. They knew exactly what they were doing. I shut my laptop and leaned back in my chair. My storage unit had been watched for weeks. Someone had been monitoring who came and went, and for what reason. I thought back to my belongings, just old furniture, boxes of books, and personal things I didn't have space for. Nothing valuable. The next day, I returned to the facility, trying to act normal. I parked near the entrance, watching the other cars for anything suspicious. As I approached my unit, I checked the walls, looking for any sign of another hidden camera. There was nothing. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, scanning my boxes. Everything looked untouched, but that didn't mean much. Someone had been watching, waiting, and I had no idea why. A growing sense of dread filled my chest as I considered my options. I could report it to the manager, but without proof of who placed the camera, what could they do? I could move my things to a different unit, but if someone had been targeting me specifically, that wouldn't stop them. The thought made my skin crawl. As I stood there, the quiet of the facility seemed heavier. I suddenly had the overwhelming urge to leave, to get out of that space as quickly as possible. I slammed the door shut and locked it, stepping back with my heart pounding. On my way out, I scanned the other units, wondering if someone inside one of them was responsible. The hallways were empty, but the feeling of being watched hadn't left. I reached my car and got inside, locking the doors out of instinct. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the figure in the video. They had been there late at night, setting up a camera, just to watch my door. Were they planning something? Or had they already done something and I just hadn't realized it yet? Sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined that hooded figure standing outside my apartment, watching through the window. I double-checked my locks, making sure everything was secure, but the feeling wouldn't go away. Days passed, and I avoided the storage unit completely. I didn't want to go back, didn't want to step into that hallway again. But eventually, I knew I had to do something. I couldn't just leave my things there, knowing someone had been watching. When I finally returned, I came prepared. I had brought a friend along, not wanting to be alone this time. We emptied my unit quickly, moving everything into the truck without stopping to think. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see that figure appear at the end of the hall. As we locked up for the last time, I looked one final time at where the camera had been. The wall was bare, no sign it had ever been there. But I knew the truth. Someone had been watching, and whoever they weren't done yet. Story 14. I never spent much time in the basement. It was mostly a storage space, cluttered with old boxes, broken furniture, and things I kept telling myself I would sort through someday. That day finally came when I decided to clear it out, determined to get rid of years of accumulated junk. I dragged a few boxes aside, kicking up dust that made me cough. As I worked my way through the clutter, something unusual caught my eye. Behind a stack of old crates, tucked against the far wall, was a small pile of cigarette butts and food wrappers. My stomach twisted as I stared at them, my mind struggling to make sense of what I was seeing. I didn't smoke, and I certainly hadn't been eating in my basement. I crouched down, inspecting the pile more closely. The cigarette butts were old, their filters stained yellow, some crushed as if stamped out in a hurry. The food wrappers were crumpled, faded and greasy, some still holding bits of stale crumbs. A strange sense of unease crept over me as I realized that someone had been down here, spending enough time to eat and smoke. The basement door was always locked from the inside, and there were no windows large enough for someone to climb through. I tried to convince myself it had to be from the previous owner, but that didn't sit right with me. I had lived here for over 5 years, and I had been in the basement plenty of times. This pile hadn't been here before. A chill ran down my spine as I slowly stood, my eyes darting around the basement as if expecting someone to step out of the shadows. The air felt suddenly heavier, the dim light from the single overhead bulb casting long, eerie shadows. I swallowed hard, trying to shake the growing unease creeping up my neck. Someone had been here, and I had no idea who. I forced myself to check the basement door, testing the lock to make sure it was still secure. It was locked just as I had left it, but that only made things more unsettling. If someone had been down here, how had they gotten in, and more importantly, were they still coming back? The thought made my skin crawl. I grabbed a trash bag and quickly scooped up the cigarette butts and wrappers, wanting to get rid of the evidence as soon as possible. Each piece felt like it carried something sinister, a reminder that my space had been invaded. My fingers trembled slightly as I tied the bag shut, my pulse still racing. As I stood there, I noticed something else, faint scuff marks on the concrete floor. They led away from where I had found the pile, disappearing behind another stack of boxes. My breath caught as I realized what it meant. Someone had been moving through my basement, hiding, watching. I hesitated before stepping forward, my heart hammering in my chest. I nudged one of the boxes aside, my hands clammy with sweat. The space behind it was empty, just a bare concrete wall, but the feeling of being watched didn't fade. I felt exposed, like someone had been here just recently and might return at any moment. I backed away slowly, my thoughts racing. Had someone been sneaking in and out while I was upstairs, completely unaware? The idea made my stomach churn. I needed to check every inch of my house, every lock, every possible entry point. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I left the basement and locked the door behind me, double-checking it even though I had never unlocked it in the first place. My hands were unsteady as I moved through the house, checking windows, doors, anything that could have been tampered with. Everything seemed secure, but I no longer trusted my own home. That night, I lay awake in bed, every creak of the house making me tense. My mind replayed the discovery over and over, trying to piece together an explanation that didn't make my skin crawl. The idea that someone had been living in my basement even briefly made sleep impossible. I felt like I needed to be on guard. The next morning, I decided to set up a camera near the basement door, just in case. I needed proof, something to tell me I wasn't imagining things. If someone had been coming in, I wanted to catch them before they could do it again. The thought of watching the footage later made my stomach twist, but I had to know. Days passed, and nothing happened. The camera recorded only silence, the empty basement untouched. I started to wonder if I had overreacted, if maybe the pile had been there longer than I thought, and I had simply missed it before. Just as I was beginning to relax, something happened that shattered that illusion. One night, just as I was about to go to bed, I heard something. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable, the sound of movement coming from below. My blood ran cold as I sat up, straining to listen. The sound came again, a soft shuffle, like someone shifting their weight. I grabbed my phone, my heart pounding as I pulled up the live feed from the camera. At first, I saw nothing but the empty basement, still and quiet. Then, just as I was about to turn it off, something moved in the corner of the frame. My breath hitched as I stared at the screen, barely able to comprehend what I was seeing. A shadow, barely visible, shifted near the far wall where I had found the pile. It was subtle, almost like a trick of the light, but I knew better. Someone was down there, standing just beyond the camera's view. The realization sent a wave of terror through me. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I grabbed my keys, threw on my shoes, and bolted out of the house without looking back. My hands shook as I called the police, my voice unsteady as I explained what had happened. They arrived quickly, their flashlights sweeping through the basement as they searched. They found signs of someone having been there, more wrappers, footprints in the dust, but no one was there now. The officers checked the locks, the windows, everything, but there was no clear point of entry. They told me it was possible someone had been sneaking in before and using the basement as a temporary hideout. I didn't sleep in the house that night. The thought of someone slipping in and out without me knowing was too much to handle. The next day, I had every lock replaced and installed new security measures, but the unease never fully went away. No matter how secure the house felt, I still couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been there, watching, waiting. Story 15. I was lounging on my couch, phone propped up against a stack of books as I chatted with my friend over video call. The apartment was quiet except for the occasional creak of the old wooden floors. The lights were dim, casting a warm glow over the living room. It was just a regular night, nothing out of the ordinary. We had been talking for nearly an hour, mostly about work and weekend plans. I laughed at something they said, shifting slightly to get more comfortable. The screen flickered for a split second, a small glitch I barely noticed. My friend's expression suddenly changed, their smile fading into confusion. "Who's that behind you?" they asked, their voice sharp. My own smile froze as a chill ran down my spine. "What?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. My heart pounded as I turned my head, expecting to see nothing but the empty space behind me. The dimly lit room was exactly as I had left it. The curtains were drawn, and the hallway leading to my bedroom was empty. My breath felt shallow as I turned back to the screen. My friend's face was pale, their eyes still locked on something behind me. "There was someone standing right there," they insisted, pointing at the screen. "I swear I saw them." A heavy silence filled the air as I tried to process their words. I forced a laugh, though my voice was unsteady. "Don't mess with me," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "I'm home alone." My friends shook their head, their expression serious. "I wouldn't joke about this. They were right behind you, just standing there." A cold shiver crawled down my spine as I slowly rose from the couch. My eyes darted around the room, scanning every shadow and corner. I reached for the nearest light switch, flooding the room with brightness. Everything looked normal, but my skin was still crawling. I walked toward the hallway, hesitating before peeking into my bedroom. The bed was untouched, the closet doors slightly ajar as they always were. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to check the bathroom next. The silence in the apartment felt heavier than before. "I don't see anything," I said, though my voice didn't sound convincing. My friends still looked uneasy, their eyes flicking around my screen. Maybe it was a trick of the light. I offered, trying to calm my own nerves, but something inside me didn't believe that. Maybe, they muttered, though they didn't sound sure. I sat back down, forcing myself to act normal. But the thought lingered in my mind, refusing to fade. What had they seen? And why had the air suddenly felt colder? The rest of our conversation was scattered, neither of us fully engaged. My friend kept glancing at my background, as if expecting something to appear again. I kept telling myself it was nothing, just a mistake, but my body remained tense. After a while, we decided to end the call. I put my phone down and exhaled slowly. The apartment was silent, but it felt different now. I tried to shake the feeling off, telling myself it was just paranoia. Still, I couldn't ignore the sense that I was being watched. I got up and did another quick check of the apartment. I opened the closet doors wider, looked under the bed, and checked the locks on the windows. Everything was secure, yet I couldn't shake the unease creeping up my spine. I returned to the living room and turned on the TV, hoping for some background noise. The static hum of the screen filled the space, but it didn't bring much comfort. I kept glancing at the darkened hallway, half expecting something to move. Hours passed, but sleep didn't come easily. I left the lights on, afraid of the shadows in my own home. Every creak of the apartment felt louder. Every flicker of movement in the corner of my eye made my heart race. I wanted to believe it was nothing, but I couldn't. Eventually, exhaustion won. I fell asleep on the couch, phone still clutched in my hand. I dreamed of a figure standing in my hallway, motionless and silent. Their face was hidden, but I could feel their eyes on me. I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart racing. The apartment was silent, the early morning light filtering through the curtains. I sat up, rubbing my face, trying to shake off the lingering fear. It had to be a dream, nothing more. But I couldn't ignore the deep, unsettling feeling in my gut. I grabbed my phone and opened the call history. My friend had sent me a message after we ended the call. I really wasn't joking, it read. "Be careful." I stared at the words, my stomach twisting into knots. I wanted to brush it off, but something kept gnawing at the back of my mind. I opened my camera app, switching to the front-facing view. The reflection of my living room stared back at me, empty and undisturbed, but the feeling of being watched remained. I put the phone down, standing in the middle of my living room. The apartment was small. There was nowhere for anyone to hide. Yet for the first time since moving in, I felt like I wasn't alone. My skin prickled as I slowly turned around. Nothing was there, just the empty space behind me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been there, if only for a moment. Maybe my friend had imagined it. Maybe I was overthinking. But the fear in their voice had been real. I walked toward the front door, checking the locks once again. Everything was secure, just as I had left it. But when I turned back, I could have sworn I saw movement from the corner of my eye. A fleeting shadow, gone in an instant. I told myself it was just my imagination, just my nerves playing tricks on me. But as I stood there, frozen in place, I knew deep down that something was wrong. I wasn't alone, not anymore. Story 16. I pulled into the gas station, exhausted from a long day. The sun had already set, and the parking lot was mostly empty except for a few cars at the pumps. As I stepped out of my car, a slight breeze sent a chill through me. I grabbed the gas nozzle and started fueling up, my mind already focused on getting home. A few moments later, I noticed a man approaching from the corner of my eye. He was tall, dressed in a dark jacket, and moved with an unsettling calmness. I stiffened as he came closer, my grip tightening on the nozzle. "Let me pay for your gas," he said, his voice low and even. Before I could respond, he leaned in slightly and whispered, "Don't go home tonight." A shiver ran down my spine as I took a step back. His expression remained unreadable, but something about his tone sent a deep sense of unease through me. "What?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't repeat himself, just gave me a knowing look before turning and walking away. My heart pounded as I watched him disappear behind the station. Every instinct in me screamed that something was wrong. I quickly finished fueling, my hands trembling slightly. My first thought was to get in my car and drive straight home, but his words lingered in my mind. Why would a stranger tell me not to go home? Glancing around, I saw the gas station attendant behind the counter, scrolling through his phone. The few other customers didn't seem to notice anything unusual. I took a deep breath and decided to stay parked for a moment to collect my thoughts. I locked my doors and pulled out my phone, debating whether to call someone. The more I thought about it, the more uneasy I felt. Maybe it was just a weird prank, or maybe he had mistaken me for someone else. I checked my surroundings again, but the man was nowhere to be seen. Finally, I started my car, but as I reached the edge of the lot, I hesitated. A sinking feeling told me that if I went home, I might regret it. Instead of heading home, I drove toward a busy diner a few miles away. The place was well lit, with plenty of people inside. I pulled into a parking spot and exhaled, trying to steady my nerves. I sat there for a while, watching cars pass by, still trying to make sense of what had happened. It could have been nothing, just some strange encounter with a stranger. But what if it wasn't? Curiosity got the best of me, and I pulled up the security cameras for my house on my phone. Everything looked normal at first, just the quiet front yard under the porch light. But then I saw movement near the side of my house. A shadow shifted just beyond the camera's view, barely visible. My breath caught in my throat as I leaned closer to the screen. Someone was there, lurking just out of sight. I watched in frozen silence as the figure moved slightly, as if waiting. Panic surged through me as I realized the man at the gas station had been right. If I had gone home, I might have walked straight into whatever was happening. I immediately dialed 911, my hands shaking as I relayed what I had seen. The dispatcher assured me an officer would be sent to check my house. I kept my eyes on the camera feed, hoping the figure would leave. Minutes felt like hours before I saw the flashing lights of a patrol car pulling up in front of my house. The figure bolted into the darkness before the officer could get close. My stomach twisted as I realized how close I had come to danger. The officer did a sweep around my house but found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no clues about who the person was. He advised me to stay somewhere else for the night, just to be safe. I took his advice and booked a hotel room nearby. Sleep didn't come easily, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. Who had been watching my house, and how did that man at the gas station know? The next morning, I returned home with my heart still pounding. Everything seemed untouched, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been waiting for me. I checked all the locks twice before stepping inside. As I walked through the house, nothing seemed out of place. But when I reached my bedroom, a cold chill ran down my spine. The window was unlocked, even though I knew for a fact I had locked it before leaving. I backed away, my heart hammering in my chest. Had someone been inside while I was gone? The thought made my skin crawl. I quickly called the police again, and they sent another officer to check. Once again, there were no clear signs of forced entry, but the unlocked window confirmed what I had feared. Someone had been there, and they had expected me to come home. The officer suggested I stay with a friend for a while. I packed a bag that night, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. Before leaving, I checked my cameras again, hoping to see nothing. Instead, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A figure stood at the edge of my yard, just beyond the streetlight. They didn't move, didn't try to hide. They just stood there, staring at my house as if waiting for me to return. I didn't sleep at all that night, my mind replaying every moment. The man at the gas station had saved me, but I had no idea how he knew what was going to happen. And worse, I had no idea if the person outside would come back. The police increased patrols in my area, but they never caught anyone. The strange man from the gas station was never seen again, and his warning remained a mystery. I changed my locks, installed more cameras, and never ignored my gut instinct again. Even now, I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I had ignored his warning. Maybe nothing. Or maybe I wouldn't be here to tell the story. Either way, I'll never forget the words he whispered to me that night. Story 17. The bookstore was quiet, the kind of peaceful silence that made it easy to get lost in the rows of shelves. I was browsing through the fiction section, running my fingers along the spines of books, when I felt someone approach. A man, dressed in dark clothes, stepped beside me and extended his hand. And it was a worn journal, the edges frayed, the cover slightly stained. I hesitated, looking up at him, but his face was unreadable. Without a word, he placed the journal in my hand, then turned and walked away. I stood there for a moment, confused, before glancing around to see if anyone else had noticed. No one seemed to, and the man had already disappeared into the aisles. Curiosity gnawed at me as I flipped open the cover. The first page had no name, just neat, precise handwriting that filled the paper. As I skimmed through the entries, my breath caught in my throat. The journal described my daily routines in unsettling detail. Each page outlined things only I should know: what time I left my apartment, where I bought coffee, which aisles I walked through at the grocery store. It wasn't just a few recent days either, it went back for weeks, maybe months. The realization sent a chill down my spine. I snapped the journal shut, my hands suddenly clammy. My eyes darted around the bookstore, searching for the man who had given it to me, but he was gone. My pulse quickened as I tried to make sense of what I had just read. Someone had been following me. I hurried to the front of the store, half expecting the man to be waiting outside. The cashier gave me a polite smile as I passed, but I barely acknowledged them. Pushing open the door, I stepped onto the sidewalk and scanned the street, my heartbeat hammering in my ears. People walked past, caught up in their own lives, but there was no sign of the stranger. I clutched the journal to my chest, feeling the weight of it like a stone. My mind raced with questions: who had written this, and why had they given it to me? I forced myself to take a breath and walk toward a nearby cafe, needing somewhere to sit and think. Finding a small table in the corner, I opened the journal again, flipping through the pages with growing dread. The handwriting remained steady throughout, methodical and obsessive. Some entries were vague, just noting where I had gone or what I was wearing. Others were disturbingly specific, mentioning conversations I had, what I ordered at a restaurant, even my expressions. The longer I read, the sicker I felt. One passage made my stomach turn. It described me sitting in my living room, reading before bed. It mentioned the book in my hands, the exact position I had been curled up in. I felt a rush of nausea. This wasn't just someone watching me in public. They had seen me inside my home. My hands trembled as I turned the page. The next entry was dated yesterday. It described my trip to the bookstore, down to the moment I picked up a book from the fiction section. The The last line sent an icy shiver down my spine. I think I'll give it to them tomorrow. I slammed the journal shut, my heart pounding so hard I thought I might be sick. Whoever had written this had planned to give it to me. They had known I would be here. I forced myself to stay calm, to think clearly, but all I could feel was the weight of unseen eyes. I grabbed my phone and debated calling the police, but what would I say? There was no direct threat in the journal, no clear crime. Just the overwhelming, inescapable fact that someone had been watching me for longer than I could comprehend. I decided to leave the cafe, gripping the journal tightly as I stepped back onto the street. The feeling of being watched didn't fade, and every face in the crowd seemed suddenly suspicious. I hurried home, locking the door behind me the moment I stepped inside. I checked the locks twice, then pulled the curtains shut, suddenly aware of how exposed my windows were. Sitting on my couch, I opened the journal again, this time flipping to the last page. My breath caught when I saw what was written there. It was a simple message scrawled in the same careful handwriting. You shouldn't ignore this. I'll be seeing you soon. The pen had pressed hard into the paper, the letters slightly indented. A wave of fear crawled up my spine, cold and relentless. I dropped the journal on the coffee table, backing away as if it might burn me. My mind screamed for me to leave, to get out, to run. But where would I go? If this person had been following me for months, they knew my habits, my routines. I grabbed my phone and called a friend, keeping my voice as steady as I could. I told them everything: the man, the journal, the terrifying details inside. They didn't hesitate to tell me to pack a bag and come stay with them. I didn't waste time. I threw a few essentials into a bag, my hands shaking as I moved through my apartment. Before leaving, I hesitated at the coffee table, staring at the journal. Every instinct told me to take it with me, to show someone, to prove I wasn't imagining this. I stuffed it into my bag and left, double-checking the locks before stepping into the hallway. The elevator ride down felt suffocating, my skin prickling with the feeling that I wasn't alone. When the doors opened, I stepped out quickly, scanning the lobby for anything unusual. The street outside was busy, but I didn't feel safe until I was in my friend's car. They didn't question my paranoia, just drove me back to their apartment, letting me breathe. That night, I couldn't sleep, the journal sitting on the nightstand like a weight pressing down on me. The next morning, I took it to the police. The officer listened to my story with a skeptical frown, flipping through the pages with casual disinterest. There wasn't much they could do. There was no clear threat, no suspect, just my own growing fear. Days passed, but the feeling of being watched never faded. Every time I walked outside, I expected to see the man from the bookstore, waiting. My routines felt like traps, every familiar habit now a danger. The journal had changed everything. I never saw the man again, but the words inside those pages still haunt me. Somewhere, someone had been watching, unnoticed, blending into the background of my life. And worst of all, I still don't know why they wanted me to know. Story 18. The moment I stepped into my apartment, I felt that something was off. My front door was slightly open, just enough to make my stomach drop. I was certain I had locked it before leaving that morning. I pushed it open slowly, my heart pounding in my ears. The apartment looked the same, nothing out of place, no signs of a break-in. But the air felt wrong, carrying a scent that didn't belong. A strong, unfamiliar cologne lingered, filling the space as if someone had been there only moments ago. I walked cautiously through the living room, my eyes scanning for anything unusual. The silence pressed in around me, thick and heavy. I moved toward my bedroom, the unease growing with each step. When I reached the doorway, I hesitated, gripping the frame to steady myself. The bedspread was slightly rumpled, the impression of a body still visible on the sheets. I touched the fabric and felt lingering warmth. My breath caught in my throat as I took a step back. Someone had been lying in my bed, and not long ago. Panic surged through me, and I turned, checking the closet and the space under the bed. No one was there, but that didn't make me feel any safer. I knew without a doubt that someone had been inside while I was gone. I forced myself to think rationally, going over everything in my head. If someone had broken in, why hadn't they taken anything? My laptop, my wallet, even my spare keys all untouched. I walked back into the living room, my hands shaking. The cologne scent still clung to the air, as if the person had just brushed past me. I checked the front door again, making sure the lock still worked. The bolt was still intact, no scratches or forced entry marks. Whoever had been here either had a key or had found another way inside. The thought made my skin crawl. I grabbed my phone and dialed the building manager. As I waited for an answer, I kept glancing around, half expecting to see someone step out of the shadows. The longer I stood there, the more I felt like I was being watched. The call went to voicemail and I ended it, feeling frustrated and on edge. I debated calling the police, but what would I even say? Nothing was stolen, and there was no proof of a break-in. Instead, I decided to check the security camera in the hallway. I pulled up the app on my phone, scrolling to the footage from earlier that day. My stomach clenched as I saw a figure standing outside my door. The person was tall, wearing dark clothes, their face partially obscured by the angle of the camera. They didn't knock or hesitate. They simply walked inside. I rewound the footage, watching in disbelief as the door swung open with ease. No struggle, no hesitation. Either they had a key, or they knew exactly how to get in. The figure was inside for almost an hour. Then, just minutes before I got home, they slipped back out, pausing briefly in the hallway before disappearing from view. My pulse raced as I realized how close I had been to walking in on them. I locked the door and double-checked the windows, my mind racing with possibilities. Had this been a random intruder, or was it something worse? The scent of cologne still clung to the air, thick and suffocating. That night I barely slept. Every creak of the building made my heart jump. Every shadow felt like it was shifting. I kept the lights on, watching the door as if expecting it to open on its own. By morning, exhaustion settled over me, but the fear remained. I called the building manager again, this time reaching him. He sounded surprised when I explained what had happened. "There haven't been any reports of break-ins," he said, his tone doubtful. "Are you sure you locked your door?" I clenched my jaw, frustrated at his dismissiveness. "I always lock it," I said firmly, "and someone was in my apartment. I have security footage." His tone changed slightly at that, and he promised to check the locks and review the building's security records. After the call, I went through my apartment again, looking for anything I might have missed. That's when I noticed it. On the nightstand next to my lamp was a single cigarette butt. I didn't smoke. I had never seen it before. My stomach turned as I stared at it, realizing that whoever had been here had left something behind. I placed it in a plastic bag, unsure of what to do with it. My mind kept circling back to the footage, the way the intruder had entered so easily. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. That evening, I checked the security app again, scrolling through the footage from the past week. My breath caught when I saw the same figure outside my door 2 nights before. They didn't enter that time, just stood there for several minutes before leaving. How many times had they been here without me noticing? A cold shiver ran down my spine. I made the decision right then I wasn't staying another night. I packed a bag, grabbed my laptop, and booked a hotel room for the next few days. The thought of sleeping in that apartment made my skin crawl. As I left, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing at the end of the hallway, but it was empty, silent except for the hum of the elevator. At the hotel, I locked the door and wedged a chair under the handle, needing the extra barrier between me and whatever was happening. I tried to convince myself that I was being paranoid, but I couldn't ignore the evidence. The next morning, I went to the police station with my security footage and the cigarette butt. The officer listened carefully, nodding as I explained everything. "We'll look into it," he said, but I wasn't sure if that meant anything. I returned to my apartment later that afternoon with a locksmith, changing the locks immediately. As I stood in the doorway, that same cologne scent hit me again, faint but unmistakable. Someone had been here. Maybe not today, but recently. My skin prickled as I glanced around, wondering if they were still watching, waiting for me to let my guard down. I didn't sleep well for weeks after that. Every knock at the door made my heart race. Every unfamiliar scent made me feel sick. Even with the new locks, I never truly felt safe again. Eventually, I moved out, leaving the apartment behind. But no matter how far I went, I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever had been there that day had been there before. And maybe, just maybe, they weren't done. Story 19. I pulled into my usual parking spot at work, the lot nearly full with the morning rush. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting long shadows between the rows of cars. Locking my door, I slung my bag over my shoulder and headed toward the building, my mind already on the day ahead. Hours later, when my shift finally ended, I walked back to my car, exhausted but relieved to be done. The air was cooler now, the sky a dull gray as the sun dipped behind the buildings. As I approached my car, I noticed something tucked under my windshield wiper. Frowning, I pulled the small piece of paper free, unfolding it with curiosity. The message was short and neatly written. "I like your blue shirt." My stomach tightened as I read it again, my pulse quickening with unease. I wasn't wearing blue that day. I hadn't worn blue at all. But then it hit me. 2 days ago, I had worn a blue shirt, a favorite one I hadn't even thought about since. I glanced around the parking lot, scanning the rows of cars, but there was no one lingering nearby. Most of my coworkers had already left, leaving only a handful of vehicles scattered throughout the lot. The silence felt heavier now, the air pressing against me as I clutched the note in my hand. Tossing the paper into my passenger seat, I got into my car and locked the doors immediately. My hands tightened around the wheel as I took a slow, deep breath, trying to shake the unease creeping over me. Someone had been watching me, paying attention to what I wore, and I had no idea who. The drive home felt longer than usual, every shadow along the road making me uneasy. I kept glancing in my mirrors, half expecting to see a car following me. But there was nothing, just the empty streets and the hum of my tires against the pavement. Once I got home, I locked my front door and tossed my keys onto the counter, still gripping the note. It felt strange, almost unreal, like something out of a bad movie. I thought about throwing it away, but instead I set it on my kitchen table, staring at the words again. Who had written it? My workplace wasn't that big, but I didn't recall anyone mentioning my blue shirt. I ran through the people I interacted with daily, trying to think of who might have noticed. The idea of a harmless coworker leaving the note didn't sit right with me. If it was just a compliment, why be so vague? And why leave it days later, after I had already worn the shirt? I barely slept that night, every creak in my apartment making me jump. My mind kept replaying the moment I found the note, the realization that someone had watched me without me noticing. When morning came, I felt drained, but I knew I had to go to work like normal. I parked in a different spot, further from where I usually did, hoping it would make me feel less exposed. My eyes scanned the lot as I stepped out, searching for anything unusual. Everything looked the same, just another ordinary morning. The day dragged on, my thoughts distracted by the note. I watched my coworkers more closely, looking for any sign that someone might be acting differently. No one said anything, no one acted strange, but that only made me more anxious. By the time I left work, the parking lot was nearly empty again. My heart pounded as I walked to my car, my breath catching as I reached for the windshield. There was nothing there, no note, no sign that anyone had been near my car. I exhaled, feeling both relieved and uneasy at the same time. Maybe it had been a one-time thing, someone playing a joke. But as I sat in my car, the feeling of being watched still lingered. That night, I checked my locks twice before going to bed, leaving a light on in the living room. Sleep came in short bursts, my dreams filled with blurred faces and whispering voices. When my alarm finally went off, I felt like I had barely closed my eyes. The next few days passed without incident, but the sense of unease never fully left me. I found myself looking over my shoulder more often, checking my mirrors more than usual. It was like a quiet paranoia had settled into my routine, something I couldn't shake. Then, nearly a week later, I found another note. This time it was on the driver's side window, held in place by the side mirror. My breath caught as I reached for it, my fingers trembling slightly. "I liked the way you had your hair yesterday." The word sent a chill down my spine. I had worn my hair in a braid the day before, something I rarely did. My stomach twisted as I realized what this meant. This person wasn't just watching me occasionally, they were keeping track of me, noticing the small details, waiting days before letting me know. I turned sharply, scanning the parking lot, but once again there was no one around. The silence pressed in, making me feel exposed, vulnerable. My hands tightened around the note as my mind raced with possibilities. I debated telling someone, but who? What could I even say? There was no real threat, no way to prove I was in danger. It was just words on a piece of paper, but it felt like something more. Instead of driving home right away, I took a different route, watching my mirrors carefully. My heart pounded every time a car turned in the same direction as me, but none followed for long. I couldn't tell if I was being careful or just paranoid. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, both notes laid out in front of me. The messages were simple, almost harmless on their own, but together they felt calculated, like someone was testing how much they could say before I reacted. I decided I wouldn't park in the same lot anymore. There was a secondary lot a little farther from the building, less convenient but safer, at least in my mind. If someone had been watching me, I wanted to make it harder for them. The next morning I took the longer walk from the second lot, my pulse quickening every time I saw someone glance my way. I avoided eye contact, keeping my focus straight ahead. The workday passed in a blur, my thoughts clouded with worry. When I walked back to my car, my heart pounded as I checked the windshield. No note. Nothing on the mirror. I exhaled shakily, gripping my keys tight. Maybe the change had thrown them off, or maybe they had lost interest. But deep down, I knew I wouldn't relax anytime soon. Someone had been watching me, noticing the smallest details. And whoever they were, they had taken the time to make sure I knew it. Story 20. The hot water cascaded over my shoulders, filling the bathroom with steam as I let myself relax. The day had been long, and this was the first moment of quiet I had all evening. The sound of the water drowned out everything else, and for a while I felt safe in the warmth. My mind drifted, barely registering the muffled creaks of the house settling. Then I heard my front door opening. The faint but unmistakable sound of hinges moving made my body stiffen. My breath hitched as I shut off the water, leaving only the sound of my own breathing and the dripping faucet. I strained my ears, heart pounding as I listened. A soft creak echoed from the hallway, followed by deliberate, heavy footsteps. My stomach tightened, my pulse hammering in my ears. I stood frozen, my hands gripping the shower wall as fear rooted me in place. The steps continued, slow and steady, like someone was moving carefully through my home. I had locked the door. I was sure of it. I always double-checked before I showered, a habit ingrained in me after years of living alone. My clothes were in the bedroom, my phone on the nightstand, but I was trapped here, dripping wet and vulnerable. The footsteps paused just outside the bathroom door. My breath caught in my throat as I watched the small gap beneath it, expecting to see a shadow move. Silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. I clenched my jaw, waiting for the doorknob to turn, for anything to happen. Then, nothing. No more sounds. No more movement. The house felt empty again, but the air carried a strange, lingering tension. I stood there for another minute, my skin prickling as I tried to convince myself that I had imagined it. Slowly, I pushed the shower curtain aside and stepped onto the cold tile. My fingers trembled as I reached for the door handle, twisting it as quietly as I could. I hesitated before pulling it open, my pulse roaring in my ears. The hallway was empty. The only sound was the dripping water from my hair, each drop echoing in the stillness. My eyes darted around the dimly lit space, searching for any sign of movement. I took a shaky breath and stepped out. Everything looked normal until I glanced at the front door. It was locked. The deadbolt was in place, just as I had left it, but my chest tightened when I looked down at the floor. A single muddy footprint sat just inside the entrance. It wasn't mine. My shoes were clean, and I hadn't been outside since coming home. The sight of it sent a cold wave of fear through my body, making my skin crawl. Someone had been here, walking through my home while I was in the shower. I backed away, my hands shaking as I reached for my phone. My fingers fumbled as I unlocked the screen, my mind racing with what to do. I could call the police, but what would I tell them? That I heard footsteps and found a footprint. I forced myself to check the rest of the apartment, my breath uneven as I peeked into each room. Nothing was missing, and everything was exactly where I had left it. No signs of a break-in, no windows forced open. Just the footprint by the door. My stomach twisted as I stared at it again, my mind struggling to make sense of it. If someone had been inside, how did they leave? The door was locked, and I hadn't heard it open again. The thought of them still being inside made my hands tighten around my phone. I swallowed hard and checked every closet, every corner, bracing myself for the worst. The apartment remained empty, the silence pressing against my ears. But the feeling of being watched still clung to me, refusing to let go. I grabbed a towel and wrapped it around myself, my body still trembling. The weight of unease pressed down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I needed to get out, even if just for a moment. I grabbed my keys and stepped outside, locking the door behind me. The cool night air did little to calm me as I stood on the porch, my thoughts racing. I scanned the street, searching for anything out of place. Nothing moved. No figures lurked in the shadows, no cars idled nearby. Everything was still, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. My fingers curled around my keys as I took a deep breath. After a few minutes, I forced myself to go back inside, locking the door behind me again. I wiped away the footprint, but the unease remained, settling deep in my bones. Sleep wouldn't come easily that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, every creak of the apartment making my heart race. I tried to convince myself that I had imagined it, that the footprint had been there earlier and I hadn't noticed. But deep down, I knew better. Something had been inside my home, and I had no idea if it was ever truly gone. Story 21. I stepped into the elevator, the doors sliding shut with a soft metallic clang. It was a quiet evening, and I had just wrapped up a long day at work. The elevator hummed gently as it began its ascent, the familiar rhythmic motion relaxing me as I absent-mindedly checked my phone. I glanced at the floor numbers, counting down until mine would light up, signaling my arrival. The elevator stopped abruptly between floors, jolting me out of my thoughts. I frowned, pressing the button for my floor again, but nothing happened. The light above flickered once, and then the elevator began its slow descent. My stomach dropped slightly, irritated by the delay. I was already tired and just wanted to get home. Then the elevator came to a complete stop. The sudden silence felt unnerving. I stared at the display above the door, the floor number stuck between two levels. It wasn't unusual for the elevator to stop momentarily, but something about this felt different. I pressed the button to open the doors, expecting to see the usual hallway or lobby, but when the doors slid open, I saw nothing but darkness. A chill ran through me as I peered into the black void beyond the door. The dim emergency light from the elevator barely illuminated the hallway, but I could make out faint outlines of what looked like construction materials, stacks of drywall, wooden beams, and scattered tools. The floor was unfinished, concrete still exposed in patches. This floor was clearly under construction, and no one was supposed to be there. I glanced at the buttons inside the elevator, considering whether to press for another floor, but I hesitated. There was something unsettling about the heavy silence that hung in the air. I could feel my heart rate quicken, an instinctive sense that something wasn't right. And then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of heavy breathing, coming from the darkness just beyond the doors. My breath caught in my throat. It was deep, labored, like someone was struggling to breathe. The sound seemed to come from farther down the hall, but it was impossible to pinpoint where. I stood frozen, not sure whether to step out and investigate or stay in the elevator and wait for the doors to close again. I pressed the button to close the doors, but the elevator didn't respond. The breathing grew louder, and my chest tightened with panic. I told myself it was probably just a trick of the sound, something echoing off the walls. But deep down, I knew I couldn't dismiss it. Whoever or whatever was there wasn't supposed to be. The door was still wide open, and the breathing was growing louder. The air in the elevator felt thick, heavy, as if the space itself was holding its breath. I couldn't move. I couldn't bring myself to step out into that dark corridor where I could hear the ragged breaths getting closer. The light above the door flickered again, casting shadows across the unfinished floor. A new sound suddenly cut through the heavy breathing, the faint scrape of something metal on concrete. My pulse shot up, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. It was as if someone was dragging something heavy across the floor in the dark. My mind raced with images of a construction worker, lost or trapped, but there was something about the situation that felt off. The elevator seemed to be holding me in place, keeping me from leaving and keeping me from escaping. The breathing now sounded almost like a wheeze, labored and uneven. I couldn't tell if it was a person or something else entirely, but every instinct in my body screamed that I needed to get out. I pressed the emergency button, hoping it would alert someone to my location. The elevator chimed with a soft beep, but there was no response. My heart pounded in my chest as I reached for the door button once more. But before I could press it, the breathing stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was even worse than the sound of the heavy breaths. I stood motionless, every nerve on edge. The eerie quiet seemed to stretch on forever, and the darkness beyond the door now felt suffocating. It was as though something unseen was waiting in the shadows, watching me. And then I heard it again. A soft scrape, followed by a faint shuffle of footsteps. The air in the elevator seemed to grow colder, and I could see my breath forming a mist in front of me. The dark corridor beyond the door felt like a different world, one that I wasn't supposed to be part of. Without thinking, I pressed the button to close the doors once more, this time with more force. The doors slid shut, and the elevator began to move again, but it wasn't smooth. It jerked violently before finally starting its ascent. I clutched the sides of the elevator as it ascended, my heart racing. Every floor it passed felt like a countdown to something I wasn't ready to face. When the elevator finally reached my floor, the doors opened with a soft chime. I didn't even hesitate. I bolted out of the elevator, not stopping until I was safely inside my apartment. I locked the door behind me and stood there, breathless, trying to shake off the terror that had gripped me. The memory of the heavy breathing stayed with me, echoing in my mind long after the incident. I couldn't explain what I had heard or why it had happened. The idea of someone being trapped on that construction floor seemed far-fetched, but the sounds had been so real. The next day, I asked the building manager about the construction floor. They looked confused and said there was no work being done that day, nor had there been for a while. The floor had been abandoned, left untouched for months. I wanted to ask about the breathing, the dragging noise, the footsteps, but the words wouldn't come. Something told me that the answers I might find weren't the ones I wanted. And though I never rode that elevator again, the sound of heavy breathing stayed with me, lingering like a shadow that would never quite leave. Story 22. I had just gotten home from a long day at work, and the quiet of the house felt comforting. The sun had set, leaving the rooms bathed in the soft glow of the lamps I'd left on. After throwing my bag on the couch, I sank into my chair and reached for my phone to check for messages. As I opened my camera roll, something odd caught my eye. At first, I thought it was just a glitch. The photos that filled my screen weren't of anything familiar, but of me sleeping. I swiped through the images, my heart beginning to race. There were dozens of them taken at different angles, each one clearly showing me lying in bed, oblivious to the camera. I couldn't understand how this was possible. I lived alone and I hadn't taken any of these photos. My mind raced through every possibility. Had I somehow taken them myself in my sleep? No, that didn't make sense. The photos were too clear, too deliberate. Each photo was a close-up, some from the foot of the bed, others from beside it, and even a few from above. They were taken from angles I couldn't have possibly captured while asleep. I dropped the phone into my lap, staring at the screen in disbelief. Panic crept up my spine, my thoughts spiraling. I scanned the room, my eyes darting to every corner. The house was still quiet. Everything seemed normal, but the photos were anything but normal. They were unsettling, invasive. I checked the date and time on the photos. The most recent one had been taken just hours ago, while I was home. The others, however, spanned back days, maybe even weeks. My mind was foggy, trying to piece together a timeline. Had I ever left the house unlocked? Was I being watched? I checked the front and back doors to make sure they were locked. The deadbolt clicked firmly into place as I turned it, but it didn't offer the reassurance I was hoping for. My body felt tense, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I tried to call my friend, but my hands were shaking too much to dial properly. The ringing on the other end sounded impossibly loud in the quiet house. When they finally picked up, I could barely form the words. "I need you to come over. Something's wrong. There are pictures of me sleeping on my phone photos I didn't take." There was a pause on the other end. "What? Are you sure?" my friend asked, their voice tinged with concern. "Maybe it's a mistake or a glitch." "I'm sure," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I've been looking at them for hours. They're not for me, and I don't know who took them. It's not possible." My friend promised to come over, but I couldn't wait that long. I started pacing the house, trying to think of any rational explanation. Could someone have hacked into my phone? But the photos were stored directly on my camera roll, not in the cloud. How could someone have access to my phone without me knowing? I checked the locks again, even though I knew I had done it already. My mind raced, jumping from one theory to the next. Had someone been sneaking into my house while I slept? The thought made my skin crawl. The more I thought about it, the more paranoid I became. The front doorbell rang suddenly, making me jump. My friend had arrived. I rushed to the door and flung it open, practically dragging them inside. I shoved my phone into their hands, watching their face as they scrolled through the photos. "They weren't here before," I explained, pacing again. "I don't remember taking them, and I don't know when they were taken. I've checked everything, and nothing seems out of place, but it's like someone's been in the house." My friend frowned, flipping through the images. "These don't look like selfies. You're right, they were taken from different angles. Whoever took these knew exactly where you were." I stopped pacing and looked at them, a new thought creeping into my mind. What if someone has been in here while I've been sleeping? My friend shook their head. "It's not impossible, but you would have noticed something, right? Things in the house would be out of place, and your doors would be unlocked." But I had already checked. Everything was exactly where I left it. The house felt the same, even though it had never felt so wrong before. I started to feel paranoid again, as if something was lurking just out of sight. The photos on my phone were proof of someone's presence when I was unaware. I realized then that I needed to know for sure. I grabbed the phone back from my friend's hands and opened my security camera app. I had motion sensors installed around the house, mostly for peace of mind. I was desperate to know if they had captured anything unusual. I scrolled through the footage from the past few days, my heart racing in my chest. I stopped at one particular video, the footage from the night before. It showed the living room, the shadows stretching across the floor. I could see myself sitting on the couch, reading, oblivious to anything around me. But then I saw it. In the corner of the frame, just barely visible in the dark, was a shadow of figure. It was difficult to make out at first, but then it stepped closer, its shape becoming clearer. The figure was tall, dressed in dark clothes, and it moved toward the hallway. My breath caught in my throat. I paused the video and rewound it. There was no mistaking it now, the figure was real. It had been in my house, watching me. I turned to my friend, my hands trembling as I showed them the video. "It's real," I whispered. "Someone's been here. Someone has been in my house." My friend stared at the screen, their face pale. "Call the police," they said softly, their voice shaky. "We need to tell them about this. Whoever this is, they're still out there." I didn't hesitate. I dialed the police, my voice breaking as I explained everything. They told me to stay inside, keep the doors locked, and wait for them to arrive. The minutes felt like hours as I sat there, my eyes darting to every shadow, every creak of the floor. When the police finally arrived, they reviewed the footage and the photos. They assured me they'd send someone to check the house and patrol the area. I didn't feel reassured though. The person who had been in my home could still be watching. The police left with promises to investigate, but the feeling of unease lingered. I never found out who the figure in the video was, or how they had been able to take the photos. But one thing was clear: I would never feel safe in my house again. Story 23. It had been a long day, and all I wanted was to get home, relax, and forget about the chaos that had consumed the afternoon. I pulled into the parking lot, my car engine humming quietly as I parked and turned off the ignition. It had been a routine drive, the streets mostly empty and the weather cool, offering me a brief moment of peace. But as I opened the door to get out, something unusual caught my eye. I stopped mid-step, staring at the back seat of my car through the rearview mirror. There, sprawled across the floor, was a scattered mess of candy wrappers. My mind raced, trying to figure out how they had gotten there. I didn't eat candy. I couldn't even remember the last time I'd bought a pack. I stepped back inside the car, closing the door with a soft click as I peered over my shoulder at the back seat. The wrappers were everywhere, some crumpled, others half open as though they'd been carelessly discarded after being eaten. Snickers, Kit Kats, and something I didn't recognize. Their bright colors a stark contrast against the dull gray carpet of the floor. I froze, my hand still gripping the door handle. I always locked my car, especially when I wasn't in it. I sat there for a moment, trying to process what I was seeing. There was no way I could have missed it when I'd gotten in earlier. I would have noticed if the back seat had been full of wrappers, especially since I always make sure everything is in its place before driving. I couldn't remember any time when my car had been unlocked, and yet, here I was, facing a mess that didn't belong to me. My heart rate quickened as I checked the back doors. Both were locked, just like the front. I turned to the passenger side, trying to calm my thoughts. Maybe I was just forgetting something, or maybe someone had been playing a prank on me. But the more I looked, the more I realized something wasn't right. Who would leave so many wrappers in my car without me noticing? And why candy? I took a deep breath and reached for the glove compartment, looking for anything that could explain what had happened. But there was nothing unusual in there. My registration, a few receipts, and some napkins. I checked the back seat again, still finding only wrappers. But as I leaned forward to get a closer look, something strange caught my eye, a small piece of paper wedged beneath a pile of wrappers. I pulled it out, hands trembling. The paper was folded neatly, almost too perfectly. It didn't seem like something someone would leave behind in such a haphazard mess. I unfolded it cautiously, hoping for some kind of explanation. The writing was messy, scrawled in a hurried hand, but the message was clear: "You're being watched." My stomach churned as I stared at the words. The note was short, but the implications were enough to send a shiver down my spine. I looked around the parking lot, half expecting someone to be standing nearby watching me. But there was no one in sight, just a few empty cars parked under the dim glow of the streetlights. I didn't know what to do next. The car had been locked when I left it, so how had someone gotten in? The only explanation I could come up with was that someone had used a spare key or some other method to get inside, but even that didn't seem right. Who would want to target me? My mind raced with possibilities, each one worse than the last. Was this a random act, or was someone watching me for a reason? I hadn't noticed anything strange in my day-to-day life. No suspicious people following me, no weird phone calls, nothing. Yet now, this felt personal. Whoever had done this knew something about me, even if I couldn't figure out what. I locked the doors again, trying to steady my hands, and made my way out of the car. As I did, I noticed something else, a faint smell lingering in the air. It was sweet, almost sickly, like the candy that had been left behind. I couldn't place it, but it seemed to hang in the car, a reminder of whatever had happened. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been inside the car recently, someone who was familiar with my routine. I tried to convince myself that it was just a strange coincidence. Maybe I had left something out, or maybe someone had snuck in while I was distracted. But the note gnawed at me, and the smell stuck in my nose like a bad memory. I decided to drive home and sort things out later, but as I pulled out of the parking lot, I noticed something strange. A car a few spaces down had its headlights on, and it seemed to be idling there, the engine running. I couldn't make out who was inside, but it felt like they were waiting for something. My gaze lingered on the car for a moment, and then I snapped my attention back to the road. I couldn't afford to get paranoid. The drive home was uneventful, but my mind couldn't let go of what had happened. I parked in my driveway and immediately checked the doors and windows to make sure they were secure. It wasn't like I was expecting someone to break in, but the thought of someone being that close to my personal space, someone who had been inside my car, set my nerves on edge. I went inside, trying to push the feeling away, but it lingered. I kept thinking about the candy wrappers, the note, and the car in the parking lot. What if it wasn't a random act? What if I was being followed, watched? I had never felt like I was in danger before, but now I wasn't so sure. The following days felt different. Every time I went out to my car, I checked the back seat, half expecting to find more wrappers or some other sign that someone had been there. But each time it was just as I had left it, except for the lingering sense that something wasn't right. I couldn't stop thinking about the note. I looked through my contacts, trying to think of anyone who might be involved, anyone who might have had a reason to do something like this. But nothing made sense. My friends and family were all normal, and nothing in my life had changed to explain why someone would want to frighten me. Then, one morning as I walked to my car, I noticed something on the windshield. A single candy wrapper tucked neatly under the wiper blade. I froze, staring at it for a long moment. Whoever was watching me was still out there, and they weren't done yet. Story 24. I walked into the laundromat just after sunset, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, casting a sterile glow over the empty rows of machines. The smell of detergent and fabric softener filled the air as I loaded my laundry into one of the dryers, the rhythmic hum of the machines blending with the quiet. It was a usual Tuesday, nothing out of the ordinary until I noticed him. A man sat across from me, his eyes locked on mine, unmoving. I tried to ignore him at first, focusing on folding my clothes, but it was hard to shake the feeling that his gaze was burning through me. There was something unsettling about the way he didn't blink, didn't look away. Every time I glanced up, his eyes were still fixed on me, like he was waiting for something. At first I thought it was just my imagination, that maybe I was overreacting, but the longer I sat there, the more his stare made my skin crawl. He didn't seem to be doing anything, just sitting there, unmoving, like a statue with eyes that never left mine. I tried to stay calm, telling myself I was being paranoid, but the tension in the air was palpable, thick enough to cut through. I moved to another seat, hoping to break the awkwardness, but he shifted, following me with his eyes, not even flinching. I stood up, walked to the vending machine, and grabbed a bottle of water, all the while feeling his gaze track my every step. The sensation made me uncomfortable, but I told myself I was being dramatic. There was nothing to worry about, right? But when I returned to my seat, he was still staring at me, his expression unreadable. I tried to keep my focus on my phone, scrolling through social media to distract myself, but it didn't help. The weight of his eyes was unbearable. My stomach twisted as I realized how much space he was taking up in my thoughts. I wanted to leave, but my laundry was still spinning in the dryer, and I didn't want to seem rude. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was somehow blocking my way out, as if he was waiting for me to make a move. Every time I looked up, he was still there, his eyes never wavering. The longer I sat there, the more I felt trapped, like the walls of the laundromat were closing in around me. Finally, the dryer buzzed, signaling that my laundry was done. I grabbed my bag, stood up, and walked toward the door, my eyes darting to the man one last time. His gaze never left me as I moved, and I felt a knot of dread tighten in my chest. I reached the door, pushed it open, and stepped out into the cool night air. But as soon as I did, I heard footsteps behind me. I froze. The man was following me, his gait slow but steady, never breaking pace. My heart started to race as I glanced over my shoulder. There was no mistaking it, he was coming directly toward me. I quickened my step, heading straight for my car. My keys felt like they were burning a hole in my pocket as I fumbled to unlock the door, the cold metal slipping through my fingers. The night seemed to stretch on forever, my breath coming faster, my palms sweating. I could hear him closing the distance between us, his footsteps growing louder. Just as I reached my car, I felt his presence right behind me. I turned, panic flooding through me, and there he was, standing way too close. I instinctively yanked the passenger door handle, but before I could get inside, he grabbed the handle too, trying to wrench it open. My breath hitched in my throat as I yanked the door back, but he didn't let go. His grip was strong, like he wasn't willing to let me leave. I pulled harder, my mind racing, my heart pounding in my chest. I was trapped, caught between the door and this stranger, who was still looking at me with those unblinking eyes. "Hey," I shouted, panic making my voice tremble. "Let go." For a moment he didn't respond. He just stood there, his hand still gripping the door. The cold night air seemed to thicken with tension, and I could feel the weight of his silence. I could feel the fear rising in my throat, choking me. Was this happening? Was he going to hurt me? Then, as suddenly as it had started, he let go of the door and took a step back. I didn't hesitate. I slammed the door shut and locked it, my hand shaking as I threw the car into reverse. My foot hit the gas and I sped out of the parking lot, my heart still racing. I didn't look back, not even once. My hands trembled as I drove, the streets blurring around me, my mind replaying the entire incident over and over. Was he really following me? Was I just imagining things? I couldn't explain why he had done what he did, why he had tried to open the door. But I knew one thing for sure, my instincts had been right. Something about that man had been deeply wrong. I didn't feel safe until I reached my apartment, locking all the doors and drawing the blinds before I sat down on the couch, trying to steady my breath. My body still shook from the adrenaline, the terror of not knowing what would have happened if I hadn't fought back. What if he had gotten inside? What if he had meant to hurt me? The next day, I drove back to the laundromat during the daylight, hoping to find some answers. Maybe he was a regular, maybe someone had seen him before. But when I arrived, the laundromat was completely empty, and the staff didn't know who he was. There were no security cameras, no surveillance footage. It was like he had never existed. I still think about that night, sometimes late when the world is quiet. I wonder if I'll ever run into him again, or if he's just someone I'll never understand. But I'm always cautious now, always aware of my surroundings. Because sometimes people's stares aren't just stares. Sometimes they're a warning. Story 25. I came home from work, tired after a long shift. The familiar smell of my apartment greeted me, the warm scent of coffee still lingering from the morning. I tossed my keys on the kitchen counter and kicked off my shoes, ready to unwind. But something was off. As I walked further into the living room, I noticed the first strange thing: the photo frame on the coffee table, the one with my dog and I on our last hike, was turned face down. I blinked, unsure if I was imagining it, but then I noticed the next one, and the next. Every single photo in the room was turned face down. I froze in place, my heart skipping a beat. This wasn't just a random mistake, it was deliberate. The photos of my family, friends, and my pets, all neatly arranged on the walls and tables, had been moved, every single one turned away from view. But everything else seemed untouched, just the way I had left it that morning. I walked to the wall where a large family portrait usually hung. It was gone. I felt a lump form in my throat as I scanned the empty space. My eyes darted around the room, looking for any sign of a break-in, any clue as to what had happened. But there was nothing. The door was locked, the windows were secure, and there was no sign of forced entry. The silence in the apartment felt heavier now, like the air had thickened. I walked over to the shelf where a few small knickknacks sat, undisturbed. My gaze shifted to the living room, where all the photos, my memories, were turned away from me, each one hiding something that I wasn't allowed to see. I wasn't sure what to do, but my gut told me that something wasn't right. I hesitated, unsure whether I should call the police. It didn't seem like anything was stolen, and I hadn't seen anything out of the ordinary on my walk through the building. But the idea that someone had been in my apartment, touching my things and turning all my photos face down, made my skin crawl. There had to be a reason for it. I moved to the next room, my feet dragging slightly as I went. The bedroom door creaked as I opened it, the soft light from the hallway spilling in. I felt a sense of dread rising in my chest as I glanced around. The bed was made. The clothes I had left on the chair that morning were still there. But then my eyes caught the frame on my nightstand, the one with a picture of my grandmother and I from when I was a child. It too was face down. A cold shiver ran up my spine. My grandmother had passed away a few years ago, and that photo was one of the few I had left of her. I couldn't explain why, but the thought of someone turning it face down made me feel even more uneasy. My fingers trembled as I carefully turned the frame back to its original position, as if doing so might somehow bring her memory back to its rightful place. I stepped into the kitchen next, feeling like I was walking through a fog. The space was exactly as I had left it, dishes in the sink, the counter cluttered with the remnants of my morning coffee. But the strange sensation of being watched continued to grow. I had a nagging feeling that I wasn't alone, even though there was no one in sight. I checked the bathroom, then the hallway closet, before making my way back to the living room. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I needed something to make sense of all this. I felt a rush of frustration build inside me. Whoever had done this had gone through a lot of trouble to turn every photo face down, but hadn't taken anything. The idea that someone might have been in my apartment without leaving any other trace was unsettling. I felt a growing sense of dread, like there was something I was missing, something important. I sat down on the couch, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, staring at the faces of my loved ones now hidden behind glass. Then it hit me. It wasn't just the photos. It was the timing. I had been gone for 8 hours. Who could have been in my apartment for that long without me noticing? And why had they only turned the photos face down? It didn't make sense. It was as if someone wanted to send a message, but what message could that possibly be? I got up, pacing around the apartment, my thoughts spiraling. I tried to remind myself that it was probably just some weird prank or a fluke, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it. Whoever had done this had gone to great lengths to ensure everything else in the apartment remained untouched, leaving me with only the mystery of the photos. My phone buzzed, breaking my thoughts. It was a text from a friend I hadn't spoken to in a while. "Hey, I know this is random, but I had a weird dream about you last night. Thought you might want to know." I frowned at the message, feeling an uneasy connection to what had happened. The dream, could it be related? I quickly typed a reply, asking if they remembered any details. My hands were shaking as I hit send. Before I could look back at my phone, I heard a sound behind me. A faint click, like something shifting on the shelf. My heart leaped into my throat as I spun around, but nothing had changed. I took a deep breath and walked over to the shelf again. The same photo of my parents and I from a vacation we took years ago was still turned face down. I felt a sudden compulsion to lift it up to see what had been hidden. But when I did, something strange happened. The back of the photo frame wasn't where I had left it. The glass seemed heavier than it should have been, and the edges felt rougher, almost as though they had been tampered with. I carefully lifted the frame away, and something slipped out from behind it, something small and folded. I opened it carefully, and there, written in small, messy handwriting, were 3 words: "I'm still here." I stared at the note, my pulse quickening. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I realized that whoever had done this hadn't just been in my apartment, they were sending me a message. Story 26. The morning was crisp as I set out on my hike, the trail ahead weaving through towering pines and the scent of damp earth filling the air. I'd been planning this solo hike for weeks, eager to escape the noise of the city and spend a few hours in nature. The quiet was almost overwhelming at first, but it felt peaceful, like the world was still and untouched. I made my way deeper into the woods, the sounds of wildlife and the rustle of leaves underfoot my only company. The trail was well marked, but as I ventured further, the trees grew denser and the path became less defined. I wasn't worried. It was a familiar trail and I had plenty of experience in the outdoors. After a while, I came across something unexpected. A backpack sat in the middle of the trail, its contents scattered around it like someone had left in a hurry. A water bottle rolled a few feet away, a jacket flung across the path, and a pair of boots lay in the dirt, as if someone had been interrupted mid-step. I stopped dead in my tracks, my heart skipping a beat. I crouched down slowly, my fingers brushing the straps of the backpack. It didn't look like it had been abandoned long. The fabric was still intact, and the zipper wasn't worn. But the way the items were strewn about suggested something had gone wrong. My mind began to race. Had someone gotten lost? Were they hurt? I scanned the area around me, but there was nothing. No signs of struggle, no footprints in the dirt, just the quiet hum of the forest. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should look through the backpack. Maybe there was something inside that could help me understand what happened. But a strange sense of unease settled over me, and I straightened up instead, pulling my phone from my pocket. As I typed in the numbers for the park's emergency line, a rustling noise caught my attention. My head snapped up, and my heart skipped again. It was coming from the woods to my right, just beyond the trees. The noise was subtle, like branches shifting in the wind, but it wasn't the wind. It sounded more deliberate, almost like footsteps. I stood frozen, my phone still in hand, and listened. The rustling continued, then stopped for a moment. I couldn't see anyone through the thick trees, but the sensation of being watched grew stronger. The back of my neck tingled, and my instincts screamed at me to leave. Without thinking, I dropped my phone into my backpack and turned quickly. My mind was flooded with thoughts someone else was out here, and they might not be friendly. I couldn't see them, but I could hear them moving, coming closer. The trail behind me was clear, but I had no idea what was ahead. My footsteps were hurried as I began to jog back the way I came. The rustling in the trees seemed to follow me, picking up speed. It was as if the person, or whatever it was, had started moving faster as I did. I wasn't sure if I was imagining things, but every time I glanced over my shoulder, I thought I saw shadows moving in the underbrush. I pushed myself harder, ignoring the burn in my legs, ignoring the nagging sense that whatever was behind me was getting closer. The trail was familiar, but now it felt like a maze. Every turn looked the same, and the trees seemed to close in around me. I tried to steady my breathing, but the fear only made it worse. I rounded a corner, and for a split second, I thought I saw something ahead. A figure tall, thin, with dark clothing darted between the trees. I blinked, and it was gone. Was it a person, or was it my mind playing tricks on me? My pace quickened. I was almost running now, ignoring the pounding of my heart and the tightening in my chest. My phone was still in my backpack, but I didn't dare stop. I couldn't risk slowing down, not now. The rustling was louder now, closer, and I could almost hear breathing in the silence between the sounds. Just when I thought I couldn't push myself any harder, I reached the end of the trail. The familiar view of the parking lot came into sight, and I felt a fleeting sense of relief. I stumbled toward the lot, my legs shaking as I slowed to a walk. The noise had stopped. I didn't look back. I couldn't. My hands were shaking as I unlocked my car, getting in and slamming the door behind me. I took a moment to collect myself, my breath still ragged from the sprint. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone standing just behind me, but there was nothing. I started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot, my eyes scanning the woods on either side of the road. My thoughts were a blur. What had happened back there? Who or what had been watching me? And why had they left the backpack in such a strange way? I kept driving, the quiet of the road and the low hum of my car the only sounds in the otherwise still night. The woods I had just fled felt miles away, but my mind couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped something. Whatever had been in the woods wasn't finished yet. When I got home, I immediately checked my phone for any missed calls or messages. There was nothing. I went to my laptop and searched the news for any reports of people going missing or getting lost in the area. Again, there was nothing. I couldn't explain it. The encounter with the backpack, the rustling in the trees, the feeling of being followed, it didn't make sense. But the fear, the way my heart raced, was real. Something had been out there, and it was watching me. I haven't gone hiking since. Every time I think about that day, I remember the rustling in the trees, the way the air seemed to thicken with tension. I can't shake the feeling that someone or something was just waiting for me to come closer. Story 27. It was late, well past midnight, when I sat curled up on the couch in my apartment, the soft glow of my desk lamp casting long shadows across the room. The hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic outside were the only noises, the kind of peaceful silence that settled over the city at night. I was halfway through a book, my eyes growing heavy when I suddenly heard it. A soft whisper, just barely audible, coming from the other side of the front door. At first, I thought I had imagined it. I paused, trying to convince myself it was nothing. But then, the whisper came again, clearer this time, almost like it was being breathed through the crack of the door. My heart skipped a beat as I strained to listen. Underscore, 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 the voice said. It sounded like my name, but it was faint, like a breath caught in the wind. I set my book aside, my pulse quickening. The apartment felt too quiet now, too still. I stood up and walked slowly toward the door, each step feeling heavier than the last. There was no reason anyone should be at my door at this hour. I hadn't ordered anything, no deliveries, no visitors. Yet, the whisper was unmistakable. It had been my name. I reached the door, my hand hovering over the handle. My mind raced with possibilities. Maybe it was a neighbor, a prank, or just my imagination. But the nagging feeling in my gut told me it was something else. With a deep breath, I glanced through the peephole, my heart thudding in my chest. The hallway outside was empty, just the faint shadows cast by the dim lights overhead. No one was there. I stood there for a long moment, staring through the peephole as if expecting the answer to suddenly appear. But there was nothing. No one. I leaned back, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Had it been a trick of the wind? Maybe someone had been whispering to themselves outside, and my mind had just played a trick on me. But then, just as I was about to turn away, I heard it again. Underscore, 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 underscore. The whispering voice repeated, a little clearer this time, and it sent a jolt of panic through me. It was coming from right outside the door. My breath caught in my throat, and I immediately pressed my ear to the wood, hoping to hear any other sounds. But all I could hear was the beating of my own heart. I slowly backed away from the door, my mind racing as I debated what to do. Should I call someone? Maybe the building manager, or the police? But what would I say? Someone whispered my name outside my door. It all seemed absurd, like something from a bad horror movie. Yet the more I thought about it, the more unsettling it became. I wasn't imagining this. I had heard my name. I couldn't just ignore it. After a few moments of deliberation, I picked up my phone and called my friend. The line rang twice before they picked up. "Hey, what's up?" they asked, groggy but still alert. I took a deep breath. "You're not going to believe this, but I think someone is outside my door, and they just whispered my name." There was a long pause on the other end before my friend spoke again, their voice low. "Okay, just calm down. Did you check the peephole?" "I did," I said, gripping the phone tighter. "There's no one there, but I heard it. I swear." "Do you think it's a prank? Maybe someone's messing with you?" "I don't know, I don't think so." My voice trembled slightly, and I realized I was shaking. "I just don't feel right about it." "Look, why don't you stay on the phone with me for a minute while you check again? Maybe someone is just standing in the hall, and you can't see them through the peephole." I nodded even though I knew they couldn't see me. It was a good idea, or at least something to make me feel less paranoid. Okay, give me a second. I hung up the phone, my hands feeling cold as I moved back toward the door. This time I opened the peephole cautiously, peering through it as far as I could. The hallway outside was still empty, the same dark shadows and flickering lights, the same quiet stillness that had been there earlier. No one was there. I stared at the empty space for a few more seconds, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I took a deep breath, almost feeling embarrassed at how scared I was. Okay, I whispered to myself, it's nothing. It's just your mind playing tricks. But even as I tried to reassure myself, I couldn't explain the sense of dread settling in my chest. As I turned to walk back to my couch, my phone buzzed in my hand. I quickly picked it up and saw a text message from my friend. I think you should check again, just to be sure. I frowned, my anxiety creeping back up as I read the message. I didn't want to seem like I was overreacting, but I couldn't ignore what had happened. I returned to the door and once more checked the peephole. This time, as I leaned in to look through, I noticed something different. A shadow had appeared, just on the edge of the view. It was dark, but it looked like someone was standing there, their figure barely visible against the dim lighting. My stomach dropped as I leaned forward, trying to get a better look. But the shadow shifted, and just as quickly as it appeared, it was gone. I blinked, my mind racing, and I pulled back from the door, breathing heavily. What had I just seen? I turned around, feeling like I was being suffocated by the air in my apartment. I needed to do something, anything to make myself feel safe. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from my friend. Okay, that's it. I'm coming over. I'm serious, don't open the door for anyone, no matter what. I was about to respond when I heard it again. ____. The whisper came once more, but this time it was so close, so much clearer, that I could almost feel the breath against the door. My heart skipped, and before I could even think, I turned the deadbolt and stepped back, my mind spinning. Seconds later, there was a knock at the door, sharp and deliberate. I froze. It was too soon. My friend couldn't have arrived already. I held my breath, staring at the door as I backed away into the shadows of my living room. My heart thudded in my chest, and I realized I was no longer alone in my apartment. Story 28. It arrived on a Tuesday, just like any other package, sitting on my doorstep as though it were waiting for me. I didn't recognize the sender, no return address, just a plain brown box. I stood there for a moment, hesitant, trying to recall if I'd ordered anything recently. When I picked it up, it felt heavier than I expected. I brought it inside, placed it on my kitchen table, and stared at it for a while. The more I looked, the more uneasy I became. I had no idea who would send me something. No one had mentioned a gift or anything out of the ordinary. With a deep breath, I slid open the tape and pulled back the flaps. Inside, there was only one item, a disposable cell phone. It was a cheap, no-name model, the kind you could buy at any convenience store for less than $20. I frowned, puzzled. I'd never used a disposable phone in my life, let alone asked for one. I picked it up, turned it over in my hands, and found it powered on with a single message displayed on the screen. The contact saved was simply labeled "Don't." I sat back, the weight of the phone in my hand suddenly feeling much heavier. I stared at the screen, wondering if this was some kind of joke. Who would send a phone like this with a cryptic message attached? I turned it on and off, hoping to find some explanation, but there was nothing else. Just that one contact, that single word. A sense of dread crept over me. I didn't recognize the number or the sender, but something about it felt wrong. The kind of wrong that twists your stomach in knots and makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. I tried to ignore it, leaving the phone on the table and walking away, but the message stuck with me. Don't. The next morning, the phone was still there. I hadn't touched it, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. At work, I found myself distracted, my mind drifting back to that simple word, don't. It kept repeating in my head like a whisper that wouldn't stop. I finally gave in to the temptation and picked up the phone again. It was as if something was pulling me toward it, making me want to see what would happen if I pressed the contact. Maybe I could find some clue, some reasoning behind the bizarre package. The phone buzzed in my hand as I pressed the contact. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the screen flickered, and the contact's name, Don't, changed to a phone number. I didn't recognize it. Hesitant, I tapped the number. It rang once, twice, 3 times before someone picked up on the other end. Hello? The voice was distorted, low and muffled, as if speaking through some sort of filter. My heart skipped a beat. I opened my mouth, but no words came out at first. Who is this? I finally managed. What is this about? Why did you send me this phone? There was a long pause, and then the voice responded, its tone oddly calm. Don't answer the door. I froze, my blood running cold. What? I stammered, unsure if I'd heard correctly. What do you mean? The voice on the other end was quieter now, more urgent. Don't open it. Don't let anyone in. There was a sharp click, and the line went dead. I stood there, staring at the screen, completely frozen. My hand shook as I lowered the phone. Someone knew something about me, something I didn't know, and the warning felt real. The question gnawed at me. What was I supposed to do now? I paced back and forth in my apartment, feeling my anxiety rise. The voice on the phone had sounded so certain, so serious, and the words had been chilling. Don't open it. What could I possibly be missing? I couldn't ignore it. The message, the phone, the voice, it all had to mean something. But what? I needed to know more, needed to understand why someone would send me a phone and tell me not to open the door. I checked my front door. It was locked, bolted, secure. But the unsettling thought lingered. What if someone was watching me? What if they were waiting for me to make a mistake? I stood at the door, staring at the small peephole. Every time I thought I saw movement in the hallway, my heart would stop, only for the world to be still again. It felt like someone was just outside, waiting. But for hours, I stayed by the door, refusing to let myself drift off. The phone lay untouched on the kitchen counter, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't done with me yet. I needed to act, to know what was going on. Then, around midnight, I heard a faint knock at my door. A soft tap, 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 too light to be anyone I knew. My heart skipped a beat. I stared at the door, holding my breath. My mind flashed back to the phone call. Don't open it. I stood motionless, too afraid to make a sound. The knock came again, slightly louder this time. I peered through the peephole. No one was there. I was paralyzed with fear. I couldn't think straight. Who would be knocking at this hour? Why hadn't I seen anyone through the peephole? My mind raced through every possible scenario. Could it be a prank? Could it be someone dangerous? The knock came again, followed by a voice, a faint whisper. Open the door. It was the same voice from the phone, distorted but unmistakable. I gasped, my pulse racing. I stepped back from the door, my head spinning. The walls felt like they were closing in. I looked back at the disposable phone. The screen was dark now, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I was being watched, trapped in this strange web someone had created, and I didn't know how to get out of it. I considered calling the police, but the thought of being caught in a situation like this one I couldn't explain kept me from picking up the phone. The knock came again, this time accompanied by a soft scraping sound. It was like something or someone was trying to force their way in. I backed away, my body trembling. "Don't open the door," the voice had said, and the warning had never felt more real. I wasn't going to open it. Whatever was on the other side could wait. But the knocking didn't stop. It never did. Story 29. I woke up in the middle of the night, disoriented by the faint light creeping through the curtains. The room was dim, the only noise the soft hum of the air conditioner. My head ached slightly, the result of a long day of driving and a weird, unsettling vibe the small motel had given off when I checked in. I turned over, expecting to see the empty bed next to me, but something in the stillness felt off. It took a few seconds for my eyes to focus on the dark shape standing outside the window. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, just the shadow of the tree outside swaying in the wind. But then the figure shifted, and I realized it was a person. A man. He was standing perfectly still, his face pressed against the glass, his eyes wide and staring directly at me. I froze, my breath catching in my throat as my heart slammed against my chest. I couldn't look away. His expression was blank, but something in the stillness of his gaze made my skin crawl. The moonlight illuminated his features just enough for me to see his gaunt face, pale skin and hollow eyes. I could barely breathe, paralyzed by the terrifying realization that he was watching me. His fingers scraped the glass, a soft, slow sound that seemed to echo in the room. I watched in horror as his hand slid down the window, leaving faint streaks where his nails had left marks. The scratches were long, deep, and almost deliberate. The way he moved like he knew exactly what he was doing only made it worse. I wanted to scream, to jump up and run, but my body wouldn't obey. My mind screamed at me to move, but my muscles felt like they were frozen in place. The man never moved from his position, his eyes never leaving mine, his fingers still dragging down the glass. I tried to look around the room for something to defend myself with, but my gaze was locked on him. My pulse roared in my ears, drowning out all other sound. I could feel the air in the room growing colder, the chill seeping into my bones, though the air conditioner was still running as it had been for hours. I slowly reached for my phone on the nightstand, my fingers trembling as I fumbled with it. The man outside remained motionless, like a predator waiting for its prey to make a move. I managed to unlock the phone and dial 911, but before I could press the call button, a sudden noise outside made me freeze. A scraping sound, like metal dragging across the ground, interrupted the silence. It was coming from outside the window, followed by a soft thud. I could barely make out the silhouette of his body as he moved closer to the window, his fingers now pressing harder against the glass, the sound of scraping louder and more frantic. I quickly hung up the phone, my breath coming in short, panic gasps. My mind raced, trying to think of what to do. The door was locked, but the window was the only other way in, and it felt like the man outside could reach through it at any moment. He was so close, and the thin glass between us felt like nothing at all. I silently slid out of bed, creeping toward the door. I needed to get out of the room, but I didn't want to make a sound. Every movement felt like a risk, like even the slightest noise would alert him to my escape. But as I reached the door, I heard another sound, a low, dragging scrape of fabric against the floor. I turned slowly, my breath hitching in my throat, and saw him standing now at the edge of the window. He wasn't just standing anymore, he was leaning in, his face only inches from the glass. I could see his breath fogging up the window as he exhaled, his wide eyes still locked on mine. I recoiled instinctively, my back pressing against the door, but the man outside didn't move. It was as if he was waiting for something, his face now reflecting a strange mix of hunger and anticipation. I couldn't tear my eyes away from his, but I had to do something. I grabbed the nearest object I could find, a lamp on the nightstand, and held it out in front of me like a weapon. The fear surged through my body, but I forced myself to take a slow, steady breath. There was a tiny part of my mind that told me I needed to escape, but another part told me I had to stand my ground, even if only for a moment longer. Then, just as I began to inch toward the door again, the man outside suddenly stepped back, his body disappearing from view. I froze, waiting, my breath shallow and rapid. The world felt like it had stopped spinning. For a brief second, I thought he might leave, that he was finally going to vanish into the night. But then, through the corner of my eye, I saw a shadow flicker across the curtain. A shadow that was too big, too unnatural to be the passing of a tree branch or a car. My heart skipped a beat, and my breath caught again as I realized he hadn't gone anywhere. He had moved around the side of the building. I pressed myself against the door, my mind racing, wondering how far he would go. Would he come back around? Would he try to break in? Every instinct in me screamed to run, to leave the room, but the fear kept me rooted to the spot. The sound of a scraping noise outside returned, this time louder, more frantic. It was as if he was circling the room, testing each window, trying to find another way in. His fingers had left clear marks on the glass, and I could see the outline of his hands from the faint glow of the streetlight. Suddenly, the lights in the hallway outside flickered. The hum of the air conditioner seemed to stop. The room grew even colder, and I knew it wasn't just the temperature, it was something else, something unnatural. I stood motionless for what felt like an eternity, waiting for the next move, listening to the scraping that never seemed to stop. Then, without warning, the door to the room rattled violently, like someone had grabbed the handle and was pulling it. My heart lurched, and I knew this couldn't go on much longer. I threw open the door and bolted out into the hallway, adrenaline pumping through my veins. My mind raced as I ran down the hall, desperate for an exit. Behind me, I heard the scrape of fingernails against the glass once more, only this time it was far too close. Story 30. I was seated at a small corner table in my favorite cafe, sipping on a cup of coffee and enjoying the quiet hum of conversation around me. The cafe had always been my escape, a place where I could unwind, people watch, and let the world fade away for a while. It was the kind of spot where the barista knew my order without me needing to speak, where I could get lost in my thoughts without feeling rushed. Everything felt calm, peaceful, as the warmth of the coffee and the soft chatter wrapped around me like a comforting blanket. The door opened with a soft chime, and a man walked in. I didn't notice him immediately. I was too focused on the page in front of me. The book one was reading, slowly drawing me in. I turned the page and glanced up as he passed my table. He was tall, with a long coat that seemed out of place for the weather. His face was pale, almost sickly, and his eyes, those eyes held something unsettling. They swept over me, but not in a casual way. There was something deliberate in his gaze, something cold. As he walked past, I heard him whisper, his voice low and rasping. "This is the last time you'll feel safe." The words were barely audible, but they hit me like a bolt of lightning. For a moment, everything in the cafe seemed to freeze. The sounds of clinking mugs, the murmur of conversation, the soft jazz music in the background, they all disappeared, leaving just those words hanging in the air. My breath caught in my throat, and I froze, unsure if I had heard him correctly. I turned my head quickly, watching as the man moved toward the door, his steps slow and measured, as if he knew I was watching him. He didn't look back. He just kept walking, his coat trailing behind him like a shadow. My heart raced as I tried to make sense of what had just happened. Was he talking to me? Was it some sort of sick joke? A prank? I scanned the cafe, looking for anyone who might have witnessed the exchange, but no one seemed to have noticed. Everyone was wrapped up in their own worlds, oblivious to the strange encounter that had just taken place. I shook my head, trying to push the words out of my mind. It was probably nothing, just some weird guy making an offhand comment. I took a sip of my coffee, the hot liquid burning my throat slightly, trying to calm my nerves. But as I sat there, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. There was a weight to his words, a truth to them that I couldn't ignore. I felt as if I had been marked, as if I was being watched. The rest of my time at the cafe passed in a blur. I couldn't focus on my book, couldn't enjoy my coffee. My mind kept drifting back to the man and his cryptic message. It was like a warning, but a warning for what? And why me? I stood up, paying for my drink, and walked out into the bright afternoon light, hoping the fresh air would clear my head. But as I stepped outside, the feeling didn't go away. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see him standing there, watching me from across the street. There was no sign of him. The street was busy, cars honking, people moving about their daily routines, but I couldn't shake the unease gnawing at me. It felt like something was off, like I was being pulled into a story I didn't understand. A story that hadn't yet revealed its end. I tried to go about my day, but the thought of what the man had said kept creeping into my mind. That night, I found myself staring at the ceiling in bed, wide awake, my body rigid with anxiety. I replayed the moment over and over, trying to find some clue, some reason why he had said what he did. But there was nothing. No explanation. Just those chilling words echoing in my mind. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't focus at work, couldn't concentrate on anything. Every time I left my apartment, I felt like I was being watched. I kept checking over my shoulder, looking into the faces of strangers, wondering if any of them were the man from the cafe. But I never saw him again. It was as though he had disappeared into thin air, leaving nothing but a trail of unease behind him. Then, one evening as I was walking home, I saw him again. He was standing across the street, his long coat billowing slightly in the wind. His eyes locked onto mine as soon as I spotted him. My heart skipped a beat, and I froze, unsure of what to do. It was him. The man from the cafe. He was watching me, his gaze unwavering, almost knowing. I turned quickly, not wanting to confront him, not wanting to acknowledge the fear rising in my chest. I hurried down the sidewalk, my footsteps quick and frantic. But no matter how fast I walked, I could feel his presence behind me, like a shadow I couldn't escape. Every time I glanced back, he was still there, just standing, just watching. I reached my apartment building and rushed inside, locking the door behind me. My breath came in shallow gasps as I leaned against the door, my mind racing. Why was he following me? What did his words mean? I had to know, but I was too scared to confront him. He had said it was the last time I'd feel safe, but the truth was I didn't feel safe anymore. Over the next few days, I kept my eyes peeled for him. Every corner, every dark alley, Every face I passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was out there, watching me, waiting for something. But he never appeared again. The anxiety and paranoia continued to grip me, keeping me awake at night, wondering when if he would show up again. I thought about going to the police, but I had no evidence, no proof that anything was wrong. The man had never done anything overtly threatening, just whispered a strange, cryptic message. I couldn't explain it, and I didn't know how to make anyone else understand. All I could do was wait, hope it was all just a coincidence, and pray that the man would never come back. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over. He had left his mark on me, and somehow I knew that one day, his words would come to pass.